Chapter 2160. Meng Wuya said indifferently. Chu Yang, your luck is really good. You were able to escape all the way until now. But today, at this moment, I advise you to surrender without putting up a fight. Chu Yang smiled faintly. He raised his head slightly. Tan Tan was standing behind him at this moment. He could clearly feel that his senior brother's body was slowly condensing a murderous aura that was about to take shape. The setting sun shone on Chu Yang's face. It actually gave birth to a kind of mottled and blurred feeling out of nowhere. It made some parts of his face bright, and some parts dark. General Meng, to be honest, I admire you for being a good man. You can clearly distinguish between right and wrong. You have your own principles and do not go against your heart. Chu Yang raised his face and said to himself, just based on my heart, I really don't want to be your enemy. When we make our move later, I will try my best to keep you alive. In return for your kindness in protecting my sister at the Lone Bamboo City Gate. Good people always have good karma, isn't it? Chu Yang took in a deep breath. His gaze gradually shifted downwards. Looking at the Mo-Yuntian army that was as vast as the sea of smoke, it was as if he was looking at a bunch of clay chickens and pottery dogs. His gaze was filled with disdain. But, all these people shall stay here. The feng shui here is not bad. Maybe it can benefit the future generations. Tan Tan laughed strangely. Senior brother's words are right. The feng shui here is really good. I can see that. Not to mention other things, the place is spacious enough. There is more than enough space to bury these people. Isn't it because their ancestral graves are emitting green smoke that it can benefit the future generations? Even if Meng Wuya had good self-restraint, he couldn't help but get angry at this moment. He shouted, Chu Yang, you should have heard of this saying, don't be arrogant. Jianghu doesn't recognize arrogance. Do you think that under such circumstances, you still have any chance to get lucky? Chu Yang shook his head and laughed. He stood up straight and said, back then, Mo Yutian snatched my wife. Everyone saw that I was powerless. Not only did Mo Yuntian not admit his wrongs, he became angry out of humiliation and became even worse. Mo Yuntian, a heavenly emperor, Yuan Tianji, confused right and wrong, inverted black and white, and brazenly sent out troops for his own selfish desires for revenge. Ignores justice, ignores morality, and acts willfully. I've fought back with all my might, and I've fled 137,800 li. The Ink Cloud Heavenly Army does not differentiate between right and wrong, does not care about reason, and pursues for thousands of miles, oppresses the good, oppresses women and children, and treats human lives like grass. From top to bottom, they are all thieves and corrupt officials. Today, I believe that there is no need for Mo Yuntian's official forces to exist anymore. In my lifetime, I will exterminate all of Mo Yuntian's official forces to uphold justice and justice in the world. Chu Yang's gaze turned cold as he shouted, if there's no justice in heaven, then I will enforce justice on behalf of heaven. His words were filled with righteousness, grief, and grievance. Beside him, Tan Tan sighed in amazement. Senior Marshal Brother, you've finally understood. Anyone who placed themselves on the moral high ground in advance and placed themselves on the side that was being bullied, no matter whether it was speaking or doing things, they were indeed righteous and bold. Meng Wuya's eyes stared deeply at Chu Yang. He only felt that his heart was in a trance, and he was speechless for a long time. The person who knew the most about the whole story of Chu Yang's pursuit was none other than Meng Wuya. In the journey of 137,800 li of death, Chu Yang was powerless to fight back at the beginning, and only fled. Later on, he fought and fled. Later on, he took the initiative to attack and stir up trouble. Later on, he lived in seclusion in Lone Bamboo City. Now, facing thousands of soldiers and horses, he no longer had any fear. In fact, for the first time in his life, he said such bold words, in my lifetime, I will exterminate all of Mo Yuntian's official forces. These words made Meng Wuya's heart tremble. Except for Meng Wuya, all of Mo Yuntian's soldiers thought that Chu Yang's words were just a last-ditch struggle before death. However, Meng Huya clearly knew that Chu Yang was not a person who spoke empty words. He never said things that he couldn't do, and he disdained to say them. Since he said it now, he must have considerable confidence in being able to do it. But now, Chu Yang, whose forces were still weak, actually said such words like exterminating Mo Yuntian. At this moment, Meng Huya was even in a trance. It was as if he saw the whole of Mo Yuntian with smoke everywhere and corpses piling up like mountains. In a trance, he actually forgot to reply for a moment. Behind him, a general flew into a rage. What an arrogant and ignorant junior! Seeing that my heavenly soldiers have arrived, he immediately flew into a rage. Why don't you surrender and kowtow and beg for mercy? You actually dare to talk nonsense here and bewitch people's hearts. Men! Take down that insolent person for me! With a whoosh, behind him, 100-man team led by a small captain took the lead and rushed out. The voice of this general sounded loudly. General Meng, since you are so afraid of this Chu Yang, please step down. This time, let's see my iron guards succeed. Actually, there's nothing much to say. General Meng is after all a general of a defeated army under Chu Yang's hands. Not everyone has the courage to continue fighting despite repeated defeats. Don't embarrass me, Mo Yuntian. Between his words, he did not hide his sarcasm towards Meng Huya. The general behind Meng Huya showed anger on his face and was about to explode. But Meng Huya sighed deeply and waved his hand to stop his men. He said indifferently, If that's the case, then it's up to General Qin. We will wait and see. General, just do your best. With a wave of his hand, all the Dream Slayer army members floated away like a cloud, revealing a large open space. Obviously, Meng Huya was determined to watch coldly from the sidelines this time. All along, Meng Huya had some psychological barriers towards the matter of besieging Chu Yang. Because the root cause of this matter was all Mo Yuntian's fault. Now, since he was not allowed to take action, it was exactly what he wanted. The 100-man iron guards fiercely rushed towards Chu Yang and Tan Tan. Chu Yang was still smiling. He was as calm as ever. With his hands behind his back, he did not move at all. Tan Tan issued a loud and insolent laughter. He jumped out from Chu Yang's side, and stood in front of Chu Yang. Then, he opened his hands in order to prevent Chu Yang from attacking. He then shouted, These are mine. Don't snatch them. Then, he couldn't wait to pounce forward. While in midair, he roared, Waha! You guys actually have the luck to die in the hands of such a handsome man like me. Your ancestors' graves are really emitting green smoke, ah! At the end of his words, he suddenly shouted violently. This shout was like an earth-shattering thunderclap that suddenly resounded between heaven and earth. It directly exploded above the heads of these 100-man people. These 100-man people were all stunned without exception. Some of them even lost their footing and staggered. Tan Tan had already flown and landed in the middle of this 100-man team. He was like a bomb exploding. He shouted, Howl, howl, howl. Suddenly, he lowered his waist and sat in a horse stance. His 2 hands spread outwards. His whole body instantly emitted extremely dense black energy. He shouted, Open! Boom! Thousands of black energy suddenly shot out from his body in all directions like sharp swords. It was an indiscriminate wide-range attack. Whoosh, 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 puff, puff, puff. The 100-man team had been fiercely rushing forward a moment ago. But they were suddenly attacked by thousands of black energy. It was as if thousands of arrows had been shot at the same time. Everyone had been shot into hedgehogs made of black energy. The black energy didn't dissipate after it had pierced through a person's body. It also didn't pass through the body. Instead, it condensed and remained motionless. The screams and howls of pain seemed to be continuous for a moment. Tan Tan jumped up. He made a circle with his right hand and said, Come back. Thousands of black energy suddenly came out from the bodies of the enemies under this command. It seemed as if they had a life of their own. Then, they returned to Tan Tan's hand. More than 100 people slowly fell down without exception. Dozens of arrows of blood suddenly spurted out from each of their bodies. It seemed that none of them would be able to survive. Everyone didn't have enough time to be surprised when Tan Tan's side made a move. He took the lead and rushed 30 feet in front of General Qin. Then, he suddenly stopped. He changed from a swift and violent forward charge to a leisurely stroll. He clasped his hands behind his back, and leisurely paced 3 or 4 steps in front of General Qin. He then asked in a carefree manner. It seemed as if this trivial matter wasn't worth mentioning. "Hey, am I handsome or not?" General Qin was dumbstruck. He looked in front of him in disbelief. His 100-man team had slowly fallen down. Their bodies were shrinking at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. They fell down one by one with a plop sound, and turned into corpses. How could he respond to Tan Tan's "Am I handsome or not" under such a great change? He felt as if all the blood in his body had rushed to the top of his head. He glared at Tan Tan in a split second. It seemed as if he wanted to eat him alive. "Ugly bastard, you're so ruthless! You're so vicious!" Tan Tan flew into a rage. He couldn't maintain his carefree demeanor anymore. He was flustered and exasperated as he cursed. "Fuck you! I asked you a question with such a good attitude. Are you fucking deaf? I asked you, am I handsome or not? Don't fucking stare at me and don't speak. You fucking aren't mute. I heard you speak a moment ago." General Qin almost fainted from anger when he heard this. This ugly bastard is clearly someone who would make me want to vomit if I look at him. And I would get nightmares if I look at him twice. But he has killed my 100-man team without any mercy. And he still has the nerve to ask me this question in front of me, am I handsome or not? What kind of person is this? Does he have any sense of shame? You're fucking handsome. General Qin's nose became crooked from anger. He roared like thunder. You rotten bastard! You're a heavenly damned scoundrel! You don't have the face to ask me if I'm handsome or not. Do you have any sense of shame? He then roared again after he was done speaking. You're a heaven-struck executioner! This old man is going to swallow you alive! Tan Tan's nose became crooked from anger when he heard this. Chapter 2162. Tan Tan roared loudly. His eyes seemed as if they were about to split open. What did you say? Who are you calling ugly? General Qin was seething with anger. I said that you're a rotten melon and cracked date. Even a rotten melon and cracked date that isn't rotten is better looking than you. Tan Tan's voice changed. You're talking nonsense. You're distorting black and white. You're confusing right and wrong. You're pointing at a deer as a horse. You're talking nonsense. Suddenly he jumped up. He was extremely furious. In fact, it seemed as if his heart was on fire. General Qin sneered. You're courting death. He pulled out his sword. At the same time, he was also burning with rage. Ugly bastard. Son of a bitch. I won't be a man if I don't kill you today. I swear that I won't be a man if I don't kill you. Tan Tan was extremely angry. You're a bastard who distorts the truth. You dare to call me ugly? He steeled his heart and rushed towards the sword. He didn't dodge or evade. Instead, he stretched out his hand and grabbed the blade of his opponent's sword. General Qin wasn't alarmed. Instead, he was delighted. He was experienced in battle. He wanted to twist the blade of his sword and cut this audacious guy's hand into dumplings. However, he was horrified to find that his opponent's hand hadn't touched his sword yet. But his sword had already turned into a fried dough twist. Tan Tan's angry face enlarged infinitely in front of him the next moment. Tan Tan's white teeth were almost close to his eyes. General Qin couldn't help but scream in fear. And the next moment, slap, 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 General Qin's face had been violently slapped several hundred times by Tan Tan in the blink of an eye. Then, Tan Tan swung his entire body with one hand, and crazily threw him to the ground. Bang! You called me ugly bastard! You called me ugly bastard! I asked you if you were handsome or not. But you called me ugly! You distorted the truth! You lied with your eyes wide open! Again and again, Tan Tan threw this pitiful General Qin's body onto the ground like a sandbag. After he was thrown down once, he would swing him up again, and then throw him down again and again. Bang! Bang! This pitiful General Qin had already been thrown down by Tan Tan 100 or 200 times in the blink of an eye. Those soldiers who had rushed over to rescue General Qin were lifted up by Tan Tan. Then, Tan Tan repeatedly used total annihilation of 1,000 armies. One by one, they were smashed to the point where their heads were bleeding. At first, they did not come forward. They thought that with General Qin's abilities, it would be easy for him to deal with this ugly ghost. Who would have thought that General Qin, who they thought was invincible, would be swung around like a rag or a sack in front of this ugly ghost before he could even get close to her? By the time they arrived, everything would have been settled. Speaking of which, this General Qin was also a first-rate expert and had the cultivation of the heaven level. In the Moyuntian army in front of him, even if he couldn't be considered as outstanding, he could at least be considered as one of the top 20. However, he was like a 3-year-old child in front of Tan Tan, whose cultivation had skyrocketed. Moreover, he was absolutely invincible at the same cultivation level as him. Bang! Bang! General Qin's body was smashed to the ground almost continuously under Tan Tan's extremely fast swings. Traces of cracks had already appeared on the hard ground. It was a hideous sight. Finally, after a few hundred smashes, General Qin's head could not hold on any longer. Suddenly it left his neck and rolled out of the room. His head was separated from his body. He was dead. A heaven-level expert had been smashed to death by Tan Tan in such an extreme and unreasonable way. He had relied on the strength of his body to smash him to death. Thousands of soldiers who were about to rush over to rescue General Qin suddenly stopped in their tracks. They looked at Tan Tan as if they were looking at a devil. Tan Tan's ferocious eyes swept across the faces of thousands of people. The evil aura lingering around his body had not dissipated. He looked straight at them. Many people immediately shivered. "Am I handsome? Tell me, am I handsome?" Tan Tan casually grabbed another enemy soldier and asked with a fiendish look. "You're handsome, my ass!" This squad leader scolded loudly. "Motherfucker! You still dare to echo the crowd? You don't know what you're talking about!" Tan Tan punched this squad leader into the sky. That person's body was still in midair when it suddenly split into pieces. Tan Tan then grabbed another one. "Am I handsome?" He grabbed another one. "Am I handsome? Am I handsome?" Bang! 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 Dozens of people were thrown into midair by Tan Tan. Their dantian had been sealed the moment they were thrown. When they fell, even if their bodies were still intact, they would be smashed into meat patties because of the free fall. Bright pools of blood blossomed on the ground. No one was lucky enough to escape. "Everyone, let's get rid of this crazy, ugly bastard!" It was unknown who took the lead to shout. Then, more than 1,000 people under General Qin's command rushed forward with a rumbling sound. Chu Yang saw this and was about to help when he heard Tan Tan's shout. "No one over there is allowed to come over! I must fucking ask today and see if there's anyone in this group who can't lie with their eyes wide open. I don't believe that these people can collectively go against their conscience and not tell the truth in front of the handsome and elegant me." As he said this, he rushed towards the thousands of people alone. With a loud shout, thousands of demon energy surged out like a tide of spears and sharp swords. The corner of Chu Yang's mouth twitched. Sigh. "My silly brother, I am afraid that you will be disappointed. When will you change this bad habit of yours?" In addition, General Qin and Meng Wuya's army still remained motionless. They looked at more than 1,000 people ganging up on one person. Their faces were indifferent and expressionless. In fact, no one even uttered a cry of alarm. Yu Qi's army had always been like this. Unless there was an order from the commander, they would attack together. General Qin's headquarters had already accepted his order. Since this was the case, it had nothing to do with the other troops. Unless all the people in this troop died, no other troop would intervene in this battle. One person against 1,000 soldiers. But the tragic momentum of this battle seemed like two elite troops fighting with their lives on the line. Shouts and screams reverberated like thunder. Screams rose and fell one after another. In addition, there was a loud and clear voice constantly shouting, "Am I handsome? Am I handsome? Am I handsome? Can you fucking speak the truth? You bastards are lying with your eyes wide open. All of you deserve to die. Go to hell." Tan Tan's voice was filled with grief and indignation. Chu Yang sighed in his heart. Chu Yang had been worried about his brother ever since he had come to know about the Devil King's special existence. So, he had naturally done a lot of research on the Devil King and Tan Tan in case of emergencies. Chu Yang had long suspected that Tan Tan would ask everyone he met if he was handsome or not. And Tan Tan would be unhappy if others said that he wasn't handsome. In fact, Tan Tan would force others to say how handsome he was. This wasn't a kind of hobby. And it wasn't because he wasn't handsome at all. Instead, it was because Tan Tan subconsciously knew that he was very handsome. So much so that Tan Tan's heart and soul believed that his essence was extremely outstanding and handsome. This was the affirmation and recognition of his heart. So, it wouldn't be swayed by any external force. And it would lead to such a special result. Moreover, Tan Tan had received two souls in one body. So, Chu Yang suspected that the Devil King was outrageously handsome. And the Devil King was equivalent to Tan Tan. Tan Tan felt that there was no difference between his appearance and the Devil King's. In fact, they were exactly the same. And they were exactly the same as each other. So, the unexpected disappearance of the Devil King's soul had undoubtedly dealt a huge blow to Tan Tan. He was fighting like a madman. Moreover, he was constantly asking that question. It seemed that he was extremely narcissistic. And it was extremely funny. However, he was actually filled with an indescribable bitterness. Tan Tan's murderous nature was unprecedentedly big in this battle. In fact, it was somewhat unpleasant. Perhaps, Tan Tan was using this battle to bid farewell to the Devil King? He was using this distant road of blood to send off the Devil King who had already been annihilated. Chu Yang's guess was undoubtedly very close to the truth. He was the person who understood Tan Tan the most. So, his guess was the closest to the truth. Tan Tan looked up to the sky and shouted without any warning on the battlefield. The clothes on his body suddenly bulged up. And the long hair on his head exploded with a bang. Then, the flamboyant long hair fluttered in the air. Countless black devil energies suddenly flooded the entire battlefield. That was the Devil King's battle technique. Chu Yang's heart suddenly shook. He recalled the few battles where the Devil King's soul had fought. And it had been like this every time. And it had always been based on this sign. "Thousand devils descend!" Tan Tan looked up to the sky and roared. Then, his body started to spin at an extremely fast speed. Suddenly, a whistling wind arose. And the shadows of people started to fly while he was spinning. In fact, they were densely packed with Tan Tan's shadows in the blink of an eye. None of these shadows were virtual shadows. In fact, they were mixed with dense black energy. And they attacked together. Countless enemies screamed as they were sent flying with a bang sound. Who can't be killed in this world under the eyes of the devil? Kill 100 people with a single step. Vanquish all illusions with a single sword. Tan Tan roared wildly. The sword in his hand soared into the sky. And the sword energy soared into the sky. Then, dozens of enemies in front of him were pierced through like candied haws. Bang! 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 His left hand was like a mountain-splitting axe. It ruthlessly whipped the bodies of the enemies. Their swords, sabers, and all other weapons were used. However, he didn't evade them in the slightest. The enemies were sent flying along with their weapons one after another. Then, they were turned into fine powder along with their weapons. Chaotic world of demons! Tan Tan roared wildly. Countless black energies once again shot out like spirit snakes. And they killed all the enemies within a radius of several hundred feet around him. Then, he issued another loud roar. Then, he rushed into the 10,000-men army without any hesitation. Venerable Devil King returns to heaven. Tens of thousands of souls will be buried with him. Devil's soul lives forever in the heavens and the earth. Countless devil energies suddenly emerged and swept across the entire battlefield. Chapter 2163. His voice was like a huge wave, breaking through the entire sky in an instant. It reverberated in the sky for a long time, lingering in the air. Let's go! Everyone, let's kill this demon as soon as possible! Tan Tan's last move was to rush into the heart of the enemy's army. This arrogant move undoubtedly aroused the intense anger of everyone. You're outnumbered. We have more than 10,000 people here. How dare you rush into the heart of the enemy's army? Not to mention that you're not a saint-level expert. Even if you are, you can't be so arrogant. The great general gave the order at the same time. Countless soldiers and horses besieged Tan Tan. Everyone's hearts were as one. At this moment, there was another long and elegant shout. A voice that was completely otherworldly said, "A single ray of cold light pierces 10,000 fathoms. What harm is there in slaughtering the world? A sharp will buried deep does not change. Gather the wind and clouds to become the emperor." Meng Wuya, who was watching the battle, closed his eyes in pain. He said softly, "Chu Yan, he finally made a move." Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Chu Yan walked out confidently like a flying cloud. His figure was full of confidence and ease, but it was mixed with an astonishing speed that far surpassed the speed of flowing light. Together with his sword, he was like a long rainbow that startled the heavens. Just like that, he elegantly landed in the midst of the densely packed enemy ranks. As the long sword trembled rapidly, the calamity sword let out a soft whistle. The dots of cold light were like brilliant stars in the sky. Moreover, each sword fell accurately on the vital points of each enemy's throat. It didn't stop at all. Because there was no need to make a second attack. The bodies of all the enemies that were killed by his long sword swayed. Thin arrows of blood spurted out of their throats. However, the thin arrows of blood had already exhausted all the strength in their bodies. The only thing they could do was to use their hands to cover their throats. Their throats were hoarse, their eyes were bulging, and they slowly fell to the ground. The calamity spirit hovered above Chu Yang with a sinister ghost smile. He opened the Taotia's mouth again and swallowed all the souls and death energy of the dead at the first moment. Chu Yang moved forward slowly, step by step. The calamity sword was by his side, forming a bright protective light ball. Sometimes it shone brightly, sometimes it was a long dragon. Sometimes it shone with heaven-shaking divine light, and sometimes it was glorious and mighty. Wherever Chu Yang went, the enemies behind him would fall down in droves. And Mo Yuntian's elite soldiers were like clay chickens and pottery dogs in front of Chu Yang at this moment. They were slaughtered as they wished. Not a single one of them was a match for him. This time, not a single person was injured. Everyone who was touched by the sword light died without exception. A blade across the sky for 10,000 autumns, this road leads to the netherworld. Chu Yang's eyes were filled with coldness as he waved the calamity sword technique to his heart's content. He killed 100 people with a single step, moving unhindered without leaving a single trace. It was as if he was entering an unstoppable realm amidst a magnificent army. Behind them, Bai Yu Chen and the others let out a loud roar in unison. They followed closely behind Chu Yang and Bai Yu Chen. They didn't show the slightest bit of fear as they rushed into the army that was hundreds of times larger than their own. Everyone's blood was boiling as they dared to die. Chu Yang and Tan Tan were able to kill the enemy's army of thousands with just the two of them. Could it be that they were just going to watch like this? Chu Le's white clothes fluttered in the wind. Her fairy-like appearance was graceful as she rushed into the enemy's ranks. Wherever she waved her white hands, the enemies fell down silently. They didn't make any more noise. Bai Shixian followed closely behind Chu Le, launching sneak attacks from time to time. She naturally knew that although this little girl didn't get along with her master, and Mo Qingwu, she was Chu Yang's younger sister. And Mo Qingwu often fought with the two of them, but when it came to a critical moment, she still wouldn't hesitate to die for the other. At this moment, her safety was undoubtedly the most important. Behind them, Yao Ningning also wanted to rush forward. He wanted to show the heroism of the Jianghu, but he was firmly held back by the two old men. This was completely different from when they were in Lone Bamboo City. What a joke. It was naturally not a big deal if Chu Yang and the others went forward to fight. However, if Yao Ningning rushed forward at this critical juncture, with his identity and position, it would immediately cause a huge commotion between the two worlds, and easily cause a world-shaking battle between the two worlds to erupt. Tan Tan was rushing forward like a madman. He roared endlessly. 10,000 creatures as a sacrifice, 10,000 creatures as a memorial. When the king returns, how can there not be 10,000 creatures accompanying him? Kill! 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 At this moment, the entire battle was already in disorder. The two of them were like lions and tigers as they rushed into a flock of sheep. It was no longer Mo Yuntian's soldiers surrounding Chu Yang and the others. Instead, it was Chu Yang joining hands with Tan Tan to kill Mo Yuntian's soldiers. Meng Wuya finally closed his eyes and muttered, Chu Yang's cultivation has already reached an unimaginable level. I'm powerless to do anything about it, these 15,000 troops. I'm afraid. Meng Wuya's eyes were wide open as he looked at Chu Yang. General, should we go forward and help? A deputy general beside him asked worriedly. If things continue to develop like this, if we don't help, those 10 generals and their subordinates will not be able to escape from Chu Yang and the vicious hands of one of them, Meng Wuya said indifferently. The situation is stronger than the person. What is the meaning of the strong taking the lead? Even if we help, will they be able to escape from Chu Yang's vicious hands? And if we take the lead, I'm afraid we will all be buried here. The current Chu Yang is already not an opponent that we can fight against. Meng Wuya's voice was somewhat bitter. Let's see what marshal you chooses. If we go forward now, we will just be sending ourselves to death. Sigh. Chu Yang's strength has advanced so quickly. He has already become a thorn in the side of our Mo Yuntian. I'm afraid he will become a great enemy that will shake the foundation of our Mo Yuntian. From an ant that he could easily squash to death at the beginning, under his pursuit, he had grown into a powerful figure who could easily squash him to death at the same time. All of this was happening with his own eyes. Only God knew what Meng Wuya and the Dream Slayer Army's generals were feeling at this moment. The affairs of the world were indeed unpredictable? The affairs of the world were indeed unpredictable. Meng Wuya suddenly remembered Chu Yang's words just now. I, Chu Yang, will destroy all the official forces of Mo Yuntian in my lifetime. Suddenly his heart trembled. On the battlefield, Chu Yang and the others were bravely charging back and forth as if they had entered a no-man's land. Their eyes were on the road and their ears were on the alert. They were unstoppable. Sometimes they were like pillars that blocked thousands of horses and thousands of soldiers. Sometimes they were like meteors that flew across thousands of feet to save their subordinates from danger. Almost everyone seemed to have turned into a thousand-armed and thousand-eyed demon god. In this battlefield that was constantly changing, they could actually bring every place under their divine senses. There was nothing that they could not detect, nothing that they could not detect, and nothing that they could not do. Other than General Qin, who was already dead, the general under Yu Qi's command had originally planned to use the advantage of manpower to crush them alive. Obviously, his plan would not work anymore. What's more, even charging back and forth, north and south, east and west to help, east and west to kill, Chu Yang and the others' cultivation did not suffer any loss. This was an unbelievable fact that was simply impossible to happen. This fact had already exceeded the cognition of everyone present. Such strength, even the experts of the saint level did not have it, right? But these two people, they clearly only had the cultivation of the celestial being level. At most, they were at the peak of the celestial being level. They definitely had not reached the saint level. What was going on? However, the reality was that these two martial brothers were like mad tigers. As they charged towards Mo Yuntian's group, the people behind them instantly fell to the ground. As they left, the people behind them fell to the ground again. Yao Ningning was dazzled and her blood was boiling as she watched from the side. She almost wanted to applaud and cheer. In the secular world, there was once a saying, no matter how strong a person's martial strength is, he can be a match for 10 or 100 people. But since ancient times, who can really be a match for 10,000 people? Uncle Hu seemed to be very emotional as he witnessed this great battle. He also seemed to be hinting at something. He sighed and said, in the secular world, this saying is often used to warn the younger generation not to rely on individual martial strength. An individual's strength is ultimately limited. The most important thing is always teamwork. But who would know that as long as one's martial strength reaches a certain level, even if one is a match for 10,000 people, what does that count for? It's nothing more than that. Previously, I heard that in the past, the heavenly emperor of purple clouds, Zi Hao, had once killed 1,000,000 skyfiends with a long roar. After reaching a certain level, the key to determining the outcome of a battle is ultimately the final battle between the leaders of both sides. His words were clearly directed at Yao Ningning, and there was even a hint of preaching hidden within them. But this time, Grand Elder did not refute at all. He did not even show any signs of displeasure. He nodded in agreement and said, yes, at Big Brother Chu's level, although the world is big, there is no place that you can't go. Grand Elder, if you want to become friends with these two people, I'm afraid that Grand Elder's own strength must also rapidly increase. Otherwise, once you are left too far behind, even if they don't mind lowering themselves to befriend you, Grand Elder's heart will always feel a little uncomfortable, right? Uncle Ma took advantage of the opportunity to guide him patiently. What you said makes sense. Yao Ningning's eyes lit up. After I return to the palace this time, I must work hard to cultivate. I must strive to break through my own level as soon as possible and reach an invincible level like Big Brother Chu. If I don't have such a level, how can I truly repay kindness and revenge as I please and laugh proudly in the world? Uncle Hu and Uncle Ma looked at each other. They both felt greatly comforted. After experiencing this unforeseen event, it could finally be said that they did not gain nothing at all. Grand Elder actually knew how to work hard. To the entire demon race, this was also a joyous event that was worth setting off firecrackers. The game company made a picture of the battle. Yes, Midnight. I still quite like it. I immediately uploaded it to Public Prestige. Everyone, please take out your mobile phones and search for Wind Rides the World on Public Prestige. Follow me. Then see if this midnight is to your imagination. Chapter 2164. If one were to talk about the most headache-inducing matter for the Demon Clan's royal family at this moment, it would be none other than this Grand Master was too lazy. He was obviously a talented person who could achieve extraordinary things as long as he put in a little effort. But in terms of cultivation, he was like a fish in the sea, muddling along. If he could deal with him, he would deal with him. If he couldn't, he would deal with him. This led to countless resources being wasted or left idle. Now, there was finally a glimmer of hope for this Grand Master to work hard. It really wasn't easy. The two of them almost burst into tears, but they were somewhat speechless. This little bit of encouragement actually came from Chu Yang's hands. Sigh. Mo Yuntian's army, under the repeated attacks, was already in a state of collapse. If they were not fighting in the Demon Emperor sky, but in Mo Yuntian's own territory, these people's morale would have already been reduced to a mess. But this was Demon Emperor Heaven, far away from their homeland. They were unfamiliar with this place. Naturally, no one dared to provoke them if they followed the army. But if they were to become deserters, they might not even be able to survive for a while. Under the ravages of the two madmen and the heavenly poison young mist poisoned fog of death, the 15,000 soldiers fell in droves and died in droves. More than half of the soldiers had been lost so far. And Bai Yu Chen and the others were also like mad demons, fighting bravely without any regard for their own safety. But as long as they were in real danger, someone would come to their rescue. Until now, not a single one of them had died. This was really unexplainable. They couldn't block, they couldn't trap, they couldn't kill, they couldn't beat them. 5 out of the 5 generals who led the troops had already died. And all of these 5 people had died for the same reason. They had found out that Chu Yang and Tan Tan couldn't be killed after a fight. So, they had simply changed their target. I can't kill you. But can I kill your subordinates? But it was under this kind of psychological stimulation that when they ruthlessly killed Bai Yiqian and the others, then, one of the 2 murderous stars would suddenly rush over like a madman. The next moment, they would be smashed into pieces. All 5 of them died like this. When the remaining 4 generals saw this, how could they still dare to charge out? They could only choose to stay behind and do their best to arrange and command the troops, hoping for a miracle to happen. They would do their best to put more pressure on the enemy and hope that they could exhaust their combat strength with numbers. This was the best way out of the situation. Or rather, it was the only way. 15,000 people besieging the other side's 32 people, yet they were still able to fight in such a sullen manner. This was truly unheard of. Tan Tan's entire body was covered with cuts and bruises at this moment. It was impossible for him not to get injured while facing the charge of such a 10,000-man army. However, Tan Tan had tried his best to avoid the vital points, joints, and tendons of each wound. So, he had sustained many injuries, but they were only superficial wounds. The current him had already gone completely mad. They fought madly and fought madly. His mind was crazy, and his soul was crazy. That boundless blood and that boundless battle formation had given Tan Tan an impulse to go crazy and destroy everything. It seemed like only this kind of fierce battle could comfort the dissipation of the Demon King's source spirit. It seemed like only this kind of crazy slaughter could dilute the sadness in his heart. He had always been a simple-minded person in front of the world. But very few people apart from Chu Yang had thought that Tan Tan's heart was also very meticulous. He also cared about some things. For example, family affection. For example, love. For example, friendship. Moreover, Tan Tan and Chu Yang had the same habit. I don't want to lose something once I have it. So much so that he was afraid of losing it. He was afraid of losing it. He was afraid of losing it. The Demon King's source spirit had been Tan Tan's teacher and friend ever since he had awakened. He had accompanied Tan Tan for so many years. Tan Tan had solved countless cultivation problems, cultivation bottlenecks, and life problems with his help. He had always stepped forward bravely in times of crisis, and had put an end to the disaster. Now, at this moment, such a good teacher and friend had disappeared forever. It was easy to imagine how sad Tan Tan's heart was. However, Tan Tan couldn't continue to feel sad while facing Chu Yang and the others. He could only bury this emotion deep in his heart after he had cried once. He didn't dare to reveal it in the slightest. He continued to use his nonsensical ways, his usual heartless and narcissistic ways to disguise himself as a person. But he no longer concealed himself in this fierce battle. I want your disappearance to be filled with the dignity of the Demon King. I want your disappearance to be filled with the glory of the Demon King. The demon's soul exists forever in the heavens and the earth. This glory belongs to me and also to you. Ah! Tan Tan roared and jumped high into the air. His body spun rapidly in the air like a spinning top, and turned into a fuzzy shadow. The next moment, an exceptionally rich devil energy suddenly emerged from his body. The devil energy crisscrossed, and formed a huge black crown on his head. Crown me! Tan Tan roared towards the sky. Tears flew out of his eyes. Goodbye! This move was the most powerful move that the Demon King had passed on to him. Sovereign as devil. The ultimate move of the Demon King's coronation. In an instant, everyone on the battlefield had an illusion at the same time. All the weapons and hidden weapons that they had never seen before in the world shot out from that high and mighty crown. It carried a strong aura of death. Countless black gas condensed into all kinds of weapons, hidden weapons, and weapons. They poured down from the sky like a torrential downpour. Such power was abundant and irresistible. Puff! 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 The sound of hidden weapons piercing into human bodies was like rain hitting a sandpit. There was no way to defend against this wave of attacks. This was because this was a super-dense, large-scale attack that was indiscriminate. Even if one could defend one side, they would not be able to defend against the other. Even if one put up an all-around defensive net and protective shield, they would only fall into an awkward situation of being weak everywhere. There were endless screams and wails below. Mo Yuntian's soldiers fell down one after another. Fresh blood poured out as if it was free of charge. There was only one black figure standing proudly in the air. He had a crown on his head, and he looked disdainfully at the world. He stood tall and straight. His whole body emitted a cold and ruthless aura. It was as if all living beings were just ants in the eyes of this figure. With one move, the entire army was destroyed. Divine Soul! Chu Yang suddenly roared. With this super outburst of Tan Tan's wave, it formed an extremely large-scale killing power. Although it was enough to make anyone's heart cold, Chu Yang also clearly knew that this move was probably Tan Tan's last crazy move. It was also the last move to send off the Demon King's original soul. It was the last outburst. After this move, Tan Tan was bound to fall into a period of extreme exhaustion and weakness. He looked awe-inspiring and murderous at the moment. However, Tan Tan would be in an unprecedentedly dangerous moment when he would become weak in the next moment. I've finished going crazy. I've finished going crazy. After receiving this command, the Tribulation Divine Soul let out a long roar and suddenly transformed in the air. Laughing strangely, he rushed into the crowd with black smoke all the way. Wherever he passed, all the soul power was swept away by him. All the death energy suddenly turned into the origin power of the Tribulation Divine Soul. Puff, puff, puff. With this, nearly 300 people's heads exploded under the Tribulation Divine Soul's sweep. Kill them all! Tan Tan roared with great momentum. Kill them all! Bai Yu Chun and the others had been sullen for such a long time. Now that they finally got a chance to vent their anger, they naturally fought with all their might. The enemy's camp, which was originally exceptionally thick and boundless, slowly became sparse. The Mo Yuntian army's battle formation, which had a total of 15,000 people, only lasted for 3 hours under the combined devastation of these 32 people. Unexpectedly, they were all killed and injured. The number of people who could still fight now was less than 1,000. The Tribulation Divine Soul crashed into the last remaining crowd. The Tribulation Divine Soul had been nourished repeatedly, and his strength had been completely restored. The destructive power produced at this moment could be said to be infinitely terrifying. Moreover, there was the heavenly poison young miss behind him, and the Tribulation Sword Master behind her. They were all killing machines, super killing machines that harvested human lives. It's over. Meng Wuya sighed with some pain. This battle, where the disparity in manpower was great, but the final outcome was completely reversed, finally ended. As far as the eye could see, there were corpses everywhere. Chu Yang waved his hand. Bai Yu Chen and the others supported each other and gradually retreated from the battlefield, leaving only Chu Yang alone. Chu Yang straightened his body and suddenly waved his hand in Meng Wuya's direction. An extremely powerful force gradually condensed in this space. It was as if countless tornadoes had suddenly appeared in the air. Therefore, the large number of corpses on the ground were actually swept up by this invisible wind. They slowly gathered together, and finally formed a neat square. This extremely precise and superb control caused Meng Wuya and all of his subordinates to suck in a breath of cold air. Chu Yang can still have such power in the midst of such a great battle. Meng Wuya stared at Chu Yang with a complicated gaze. It could not be denied that there was deep wariness hidden in his eyes. Chu Yang said lightly, I heard that Marshal Mo Yuntian you personally came to kill me, but I did not have the chance to meet you. It is really regretful. I did not welcome Marshal Yu's arrival. It is really impolite. Chapter 2165. Just now, I am a little tired. If General Meng did not have his teachings, Chu Yang would like to leave and find a place to rest. Chu Yang smiled, his handsome face remaining calm. A total of 15,000 enemies were wiped out, then giving the corpses as gifts to the enemy's commander. Chu Yang's actions were almost crazy. But Meng Huya deeply understood that this was not because Chu Yang was inhuman, cruel, and merciless, but because Chu Yang was using such actions to express the anger in his heart. Perhaps there was a deeper meaning behind these words. These corpses are a warning from Chu Yang. If anyone else came, the result would be the same as these corpses. Or it could be said that this was a challenge. A challenge to the entire ink cloud sky. Chu Yang, I admit that your strength has increased greatly, and this old man knows that I'm powerless against you. However, you've acted so arrogantly this time. Isn't it a bit too much? Meng Huya's expression was bleak as he said, I did not do my best and have been punished by the Sky Emperor. After this, I will return to Ink Cloud Sky to receive my punishment. You and I may not have the chance to meet again. Meng Huya said heavily. It is no longer important who is right and who is wrong in this matter. But before I leave, I still have to give you a word of advice. Consider it a little communication between you and me. Chu Yang took a deep breath and his expression turned solemn. Please speak. Meng Huya was silent for a while. The world is big and there are many experts. There is always someone better than you. It is definitely something you cannot imagine. This sentence seemed to be an empty statement that had no meaning at all. Hearing this, Chu Yang was unexpectedly silent for a while. After thinking for a while, he finally said seriously, Thank you very much. Meng Huya's expression was still heavy as he nodded slightly. He had always felt guilty, and had a good impression of this young man in front of him. After today, there was a great chance that they would part forever. He would rather use this last chance to give this young man a word of advice with all the experience he had accumulated in his life. Chu Yang suddenly raised his head and said, General Meng, to return the favor, I also have to give you a word of advice. Meng Huya sighed. Please speak. Chu Yang said softly. I believe that Marshal Yu will have experts of the saint level under his command this time. But in this battle, including the canyon, I have never met one. With our strength, even if we can't change the battle situation when facing experts of that level, we would not have suffered as little loss as now. Chu Yang completely ignored Meng Huya's increasingly ugly expression and continued to say, Elder Meng, your situation in Ink Cloud Sky is not good. Meng Huya's face was expressionless as he said indifferently, Chu Yang, the mountains are high and the rivers are long. He waved his hand and was about to leave. Chu Yang smiled faintly. He didn't say any more superfluous words, and turned to leave. However, at this moment, with a loud bang, the sky suddenly darkened without any warning. From the dark Yama gorge that Chu Yang and the others had come out from, countless things suddenly rushed out with a crashing sound. Bang! 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 A cold voice said. Chu Yang, not only did you give me those gifts, you also gave me these gifts. Everyone's expression changed. Looking closely, they were all shocked. What fell from the sky were also many corpses. Just by looking, there were at least 4,000 to 5,000 people. The previously empty space suddenly turned into a sea of blood and a mountain of corpses, piled high. A burly figure walked out step by step from the Yama gorge with a gloomy face. You lie. Marshal Yu of Ink Cloud Sky. He had rushed here at such a delicate moment. Following behind him was a large group of military officers from Moyutian. Every one of them had a dense murderous aura around them. The way they looked at Chu Yang was as if they wished they could swallow him whole. Yu Lai and the others had been waiting on the other side to completely cut off Chu Yang's possible escape route. But after waiting for more than a day, they still did not see the people inside come out. Everyone was a little surprised by this result. According to the predetermined strategy, no matter what, someone should have come out now. Even if Chu Yang and the others did not come out, their men should have come out. The delay of information was the biggest taboo of a military strategist. So Yu Lai could only send people in to investigate. But after sending 3 batches of people, there was no news at all. Yu Lai knew that something must have happened. He immediately led 100 trusted experts into the Yama Gorge. By this time, the poison that Chu Lur had set up had begun to weaken. Besides, these people were all top experts. After discovering that there was poison, Yu Lai immediately used the saint's conveyor technique to empty the surrounding air. Then, he wrapped everyone with his deep cultivation and walked all the way in. But after entering for a short distance, they found a large number of corpses. But in that dark place where there was no light, even with Yu Lai, they could not tell whether these corpses were the enemy or their own people. After searching for a while, relying on some things that the corpses were wearing, they could tell that all the corpses were their own people. How did our people die here? Yu Lai ordered to bring the corpses and continue to move forward. But they did not expect that there would be more and more corpses in front. Searching one by one to confirm their identity would be too late. Yu Lai ordered to bring all the corpses. When they got out, they would check these corpses again to see how many of them were their own subordinates, and how many were their enemies. But the further they went, the more corpses there were. These 100 people collected all the corpses along the way. Their storage rings were almost full before they finally finished collecting. The storage rings of more than a dozen super experts were all full. How much storage was there? Yu Lai and the others rushed all the way and finally came to the entrance of the Yama Gorge. But they unexpectedly heard the conversation between Chu Yang and Meng Wuya. For a moment, they could not help but fume with anger. Deputy Commander Yu. Meng Wuya cupped his hands and was about to explain when he was interrupted by Yu Lai. Shut up! Meng Wuya, what face do you have to talk to me? Meng Wuya said lightly. I do not think that I have neglected my duties. What is Commander Yu's accusation? Bullshit! Yuchi flew into a rage. I let you command, and you command them to death? Is this still not neglecting your duties? How do you still want to neglect your duties? Meng Wuya said lightly. It's not that I don't want to command. But Deputy Commander, you should understand your own subordinates. Will they listen to my command? We know each other well. Do you really want to say it out loud? Yu Lai said angrily. Then tell me, why is not a single one of your subordinates dead? The facts are in front of your eyes and you still want to talk glibly and quibble. Meng Wuya said lightly. That is also because Deputy Commander Yu had ordered me to not continue to participate in this extermination. Yu Lai was so angry that he laughed. So, you and Chu Yang appreciating each other, talking and laughing together, and betraying the secrets of my Moutian, was also ordered by me? Meng Wuya said lightly. This argument is only Deputy Commander Yu's side of the story. I have a clear conscience and am worthy of the billions of lives in Moutian. This is enough. Presumptuous! Yu Lai scolded. You have already confided in the enemy, and you still dare to talk about having a clear conscience? No wonder you led so many people to chase after Chu Yang but were defeated. It turns out that you already had a rebellious heart, and had no intention of avenging the Grand Prince. Meng Wuya, you are a traitor of Moutian. When this sentence came out, no matter how good Meng Wuya's temper and self-restraint were, he would still be furious. Even the Dream Slayer army generals behind him were inexplicably indignant at this moment. We have more than 10,000 people chasing after Chu Yang and lost more than 8,000 people. Now you are saying that we are traitors? Please think more when you speak, Deputy Commander Yu. We, the Dream Slayer army, are definitely not traitors and will never become traitors. Meng Wuya's face turned cold. Therefore, I do not dare to accept the word traitor. Yu Lai's murderous aura was heavy. Meng Wuya, from what you said, I am wrong to say that you are a traitor? Meng Wuya was not afraid. He said, Yes, Deputy Commander Yu's words are indeed thoughtless. Yu Lai's face suddenly turned black. He turned his head and looked at Chu Yang. In a deep voice he said, Chu Yang, I have long heard of your great name. Just an ant like you can make us, the people of Moyun Heaven, go to war. This is really something to be proud of. At this moment, in this situation, don't you want to say something? Chu Yang was a little confused. Yu Lai was obviously happily arguing with Meng Wuya, but when the internal conflict was fierce, he suddenly turned his head to talk to him. Moreover, he said something that did not make sense. He could not help but roll his eyes and said, "Say something? What is there to say?" "Oh right, I still have something to say. What I want to say is very simple. You Mayan Tian people can be my enemy in this life. Even if you die in the Yellow Springs, it is something to be proud of." Yu Lai's words were full of arrogance and condescension. But Chu Yang's counterattack was even more ruthless and did not leave any leeway. The positions of both sides were clear. Naturally, there was no need to leave any leeway in the conversation. To be hypocritical and courteous at such a time would only lower his own status. Yu Lai's face was cold. He said with hatred, "Chu Yang, you have always been talking about unfairness. It is our Mayan heaven that has let you down. Now I will give you a fair chance. You have just finished a great battle. You must be very tired and have little strength to fight again. I will give you a chance to recuperate on one side. When you are full of energy, we will continue this battle." Chu Yang squinted his eyes and said with a smile, "You are indeed the commander of Mayan heaven. How imposing. But I don't know what kind of fair chance Deputy Commander Yu is giving me? Is it the hundreds of people here fighting me alone? Or is it me fighting more than 100 of you alone?" Yu Lai said faintly, "You'll know later what this marshal's tongue is like." Then he turned his head and no longer paid attention to Chu Yang. Chu Yang laughed. He simply sat cross-legged on the ground and started to recuperate. Chapter 2166. Just as Yuchi had said, Chu Yang really couldn't leave now. If he left now, Yuchi would start chasing after him. If that was the case, Chu Yang and Tan Tan would have the ability to escape, but Bai Yu Chen and the others wouldn't be able to. After all, the people who came with Yuchi this time were all top-notch experts. There were as many as 5 top-notch experts who had reached the saint level. Yuchi himself was a saint-level expert. Among the 4 early-stage saint experts under him, one of them was at the peak of the early-stage saint level. The others were at least at the celestial level, and they were all at the peak of the celestial level. If such a team were to pursue and kill Bai Yuchen and the others at all costs, it wouldn't be as easy as turning over one's hand, or as effortless as blowing off dust. But it would still be a sure thing. If one were to exclude Chu Yang, Tan Tan, and the Tribulation Divine Soul in Chu Yang's entire team, then only Bai Yuchen and the other 2 people would have a little bit of strength to fight. The others would basically be in a bad situation where they would die at the first touch. Now that Yuchi had caught up, it wasn't realistic for Chu Yang to want to escape, unless he could bear to abandon the majority of the people. Only a few people escaped. But Chu Yang definitely couldn't do such a thing. In the current situation, he could only wait and see, and then act according to the circumstances. Seeing Chu Yang return, Yuchi turned his head again to look at Meng Wuya, but the murderous aura in his eyes was getting stronger and stronger. The promise he made before was true, and there was nothing strange about it. The reason why he didn't hesitate to give Chu Yang a condition first was to take down Meng Wuya first. As long as he took down Meng Wuya, it was equivalent to breaking Meng Wuya's boss, Mu Shuai's arm. Meng Wuya disregarded the Emperor's grace and betrayed the enemy. The evidence of his crime is conclusive. He ignored the blood feud and treated the Heavenly Emperor's order as a joke. He colluded with the enemy and destroyed more than 20,000 of my Mayan Sky's elite men. Such a despicable act is really a heinous crime. His crime is unforgivable. His subordinates, the Dream Executioners, are all in cahoots with him. If we don't get rid of these traitors, we won't be able to appease the anger of the people. If we don't kill them, we won't be able to appease the souls of the 20,000 heroes in heaven. Yu Qi's voice was deep and slow. He looked at Meng Wuya with a gaze as cold as ice. Every word and sentence seemed to be chasing after the soul. His voice was cold and chilling. Fellow comrades, I, Yu Qi, will represent Lord Sky Emperor to give the order today. This Mo Yuntian rebel, Meng Wuya, will be arrested on the spot. If he resists, kill him immediately. Understood? More than 100 people behind Yuchi revealed a cruel and bloodthirsty expression. Wait! Meng Wuya shouted and looked at Yuchi. Vice Marshal Yu, even if I am guilty, I still need to return to Ink Cloud Sky and let Lord Sky Emperor judge. Vice Marshal Yu, you don't have the right to determine whether I am dead or alive, Yuchi said coldly. Traitor, you are still talking nonsense. A despicable person like you, everyone has the right to kill you. He raised his hand, and there was already a token in his hand. When I first arrived at Demon Emperor Heaven, I have already sent back the news. Meng Wuya has rebelled against Ink Cloud Sky Emperor and is in cahoots with Chu Yang and the rest. Lord Sky Emperor has already ordered me to handle this matter with full authority. Meng Wuya, do you still want to go back to Ink Cloud Sky to explain? You are destined to have no hope in this life. Meng Wuya was so angry that his whole body was shaking. He couldn't believe that Yuchi would actually do anything to frame him. It was even more unbelievable that he had already become a traitor in Ink Cloud Sky. Just because of Yuchi's one-sided statement, Heavenly Emperor Ink Cloud concluded that he had betrayed Ink Cloud Sky. When the dream executioners behind him heard that, they all revealed an extremely angry expression. There was even an indescribable grievance in them. In order to complete the mission, so many of our comrades died. Just because of a few words, we became traitors? Is there still justice in this world? Bathing in blood and killing for 100,000 miles, fighting alone far away from home, not familiar with the place, who knows how much suffering, how much grievance, how much humiliation, and how much humiliation, they actually became traitors. Meng Wuya looked up to the sky and sighed. He only felt an indescribable bitterness in his heart. He was actually speechless for a long time. Deputy Commander Yu, I know your target is me. I will surrender myself, Meng Wuya said bitterly. It's just that, I don't know if you can let these brothers of mine go. If I am worried that they will turn on me, I will let them disband on the spot and never return to Ink Cloud Sky. They will fend for themselves in Ink Cloud Sky. Looking at Yuchi's posture, Meng Wuya already knew that he would definitely not allow him to return to Ink Cloud Sky alive this time. Whether he resisted or not, the outcome was already destined. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but feel disheartened. Great General! Countless officers shouted. No matter what, we will not abandon the Great General and escape alone. Since Yuchi wants to kill us, then let's fight it out with him. Yes, fight it out with them. Fight to the death, fight to the death, fight to the death. For a moment, the crowd was in an uproar. Yuchi sneered. As expected, you are all jackals of the same tribe, traitors. Kill all of these traitors for me, don't leave anyone alive. Meng Wuya looked up to the sky and sighed, his expression sorrowful. If you want to condemn someone, you can always find a reason to do so. Marshal Yu's actions are indeed dignified, he takes care of everything. Haha, I, Meng Wuya, was born in Ink Cloud Sky, I grew up in Ink Cloud Sky, I was born as a person of Ink Cloud Sky, I will die as a person of Ink Cloud Sky, I have been through hundreds of battles, I have been loyal to His Majesty, I have never done anything deceitful, but I never thought that today, I will become traitors of Ink Cloud Sky. Now that I've become a traitor to the Heavenly Court, where is justice? Where is justice? Meng Wuya looked up to the sky and laughed maniacally, but that laughter sounded like he was crying. Behind him, the thousands of Dream Slayer army soldiers all felt the same, they were all about to cry. They had fought for Ink Cloud Sky all their lives, they had no regrets, they were good men, they threw their heads and spilled their blood, when had they ever feared death? Who would have thought that they would become traitors of the land they protected? Ha! Ridiculous! Ridiculous! Indeed, justice is not in the human heart, right and wrong is up to people to say. Meng Wuya looked up to the sky and laughed, his tears finally rolling down, his eyes full of desolation. Yuchi's face was like iron, he waved his hand and shouted. Everyone, what are you still hesitating for? Take down the traitor in front of you as soon as possible. First, quell the internal strife, kill the traitor, then go to the foreign invaders, take revenge. Ink Cloud Sky's prestige, today is the day. He waved his hand, the clear sky was suddenly dyed black. A voice full of majesty said, "Take down Meng Wuya, kill the traitor, purge the heavenly court." Everyone heard it clearly. This voice was the voice of Heavenly Emperor Ink Cloud, Yuan Tianjie himself. When this voice came out, Meng Wuya and all the Dream Slayer army felt like they were struck by lightning, each of them trembling all over. Heavenly Emperor Ink Cloud personally said that Meng Wuya was a traitor. Then, it would no longer be a case of 3 people becoming a tiger, or public opinion, but it would definitely happen. In other words, this was already an ironclad case. Even if there was no shadow at all, it had now become a fact. The last bit of hope in Meng Wuya's heart completely collapsed at this moment. A person whose heart had already been shattered, even if he was a saint, so what? Yuchi looked at Meng Wuya cruelly and proudly and shouted, "Obey the Emperor's order, everyone, kill!" Roger. The aura of more than 100 experts under his command became stronger, and they roared in unison. Then, more than 100 people moved together, closing in on Meng Wuya and the others, overflowing with murderous intent. Meng Wuya's expression was inexplicably sorrowful, his lips trembling, his eyes, which had always been wise in the past, were now a little frantic and confused. It was as if his life's belief and persistence had all collapsed at this moment. Behind him, more than 1,300 Dream Slayer army people were also in a daze. Shwa! The hundreds of Ink Cloud guards who had survived the previous battle suddenly retreated in an orderly manner, pulling away from the Dream Slayer army. At this time, they were retreating to make their position clear. We have nothing to do with Meng Wuya. They were not Meng Wuya's direct subordinates, but belonged to the royal family of Ink Cloud Sky, so this was not adding insult to injury. Now that the situation was clear, Meng Wuya and the Dream Slayer army had been convicted of treason, so it was not strange that they wanted to protect themselves. In an extremely quiet place, only the sound of the footsteps of more than 100 people could be heard slowly moving forward, rustling. The sound of tears falling down, those were the tears of the Dream Slayer army soldiers. The distance between the two sides was getting closer and closer. "General is not a traitor! We are not traitors!" Suddenly, a Dream Slayer army deputy general's face was full of tears, and he screamed at the top of his lungs. As he screamed, he suddenly rushed out without caring about his own safety. "We are not traitors! We have never been traitors!" His body trembled, and he opened his hands. "We want to see His Majesty the Sky Emperor to explain. This is Yuchi's trap. General Meng is innocent, we are innocent. We want to see His Majesty the Sky Emperor." However, more than 100 people opposite him did not say a word, their expressions were cold, and they stared at him coldly. A sword light suddenly flew out. "Wu Changfeng! Get out of the way!" Meng Wuya shouted. But the deputy general called Wu Changfeng did not react at all. He opened his hands and blocked in front of everyone, shouting, "General Meng is not a traitor, we are innocent." Like a bolt of lightning, the sword light pierced into his heart. At this point, Wu Changfeng's voice came to an abrupt end, and he looked at the sharp sword in his chest in confusion. Suddenly, he shouted heartbreakingly, "We are innocent!" His majestic body suddenly fell forward, and thick blood slowly spread under his body. Meng Wuya's eyes were wide open, and he shouted, "Yuchi, no matter what crime we bear now, we still have to go back to Mo Yuntian. We should at least have a chance to appeal." "Why do you want to kill us now?" Yuchi said indifferently. "You still want to go back to Mo Yuntian? You still want a chance to appeal? Should I say that you are blindly loyal or stupid? Or are you a complete idiot?" He waved his hand coldly and shouted, "Kill, leave no one alive!" Yuchi had prepared all of this for a long time. When he first came out, he had not met with Meng Wuya, and had not investigated at all. He had already sent back news that Meng Wuya was chasing Chu Yang, and there was something fishy about it. Chapter 2167. With Meng Wuya's combat strength and the strength he possessed, Meng Wuya could easily defeat him. It was absolutely impossible to not catch a junior who only had the strength of a saint. Then, in an extremely short period of time, he sent back 3 messages in a row, saying that Meng Huiya and Chu Yang appreciated each other, saying that Meng Huiya was too critical of the deceased, and then went one step further, saying that Meng Huiya and Chu Yang colluded, and when he sent another message, he simply said that Meng Huiya was very dissatisfied with the way His Majesty handled things, and already had the heart of disobedience, and so on. Pushing forward step by step, layer by layer, gradually made Heaven Emperor Mo Yun, under the pain and anger of losing his beloved, finally issued a secret order to capture Meng Huiya. Under such circumstances, how could Yuqi let Meng Huiya return to Mo Yun Tian alive? Once he returned, wouldn't all the schemes he had set up this time be for naught? Moreover, Meng Huiya always had Marshal Mu over there to protect him. No matter how bad it was, he would not die. Meng Huiya not only had the cultivation of a saint, but he was also a rather important figure in Marshal Mu's group. Killing Meng Huiya would undoubtedly be a considerable blow to Marshal Mu's group. As long as Meng Huiya died here, there would be no evidence. Then, whatever he said would be the truth. If he said to rebel, he would rebel. If he said to resist arrest, he would resist arrest. Anyway, at this moment in Demon Emperor Heaven, only he, Yuqi's people, could survive. Whatever he said was the truth. Who could refute? After returning, he could even use Meng Huiya's matter this time to ruthlessly attack Marshal Mu's faction in the military. It was a good thing to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. In any case, the situation of losing soldiers and generals had already been decided. With Meng Huiya as a scapegoat for colluding with foreign enemies, how could they not make good use of him? All the losses would logically become targeted targets. After killing Meng Huiya, and then taking down Chu Yang and the others, he would only have a great merit and not an inch of fault. What was killing 2 birds with 1 stone? Wasn't this killing 2 birds with 1 stone? Yuqi was pleased in his heart, but his face did not show it. His eyes were full of righteous indignation, as if he was really facing a traitor. Meng Huiya trembled all over. Looking at Wu Chongfeng's corpse lying stiffly on the ground, the muscles on his face spasmed, and 2 lines of clear tears flowed down his cheeks. Meng Huiya, you colluded with Mo Yun Tian's enemy. The evidence is irrefutable. Why don't you surrender? A master said coldly. Suddenly, the dream army became noisy. Our general is not a traitor. We are not a traitor. The generals under Meng Huiya's command had a firm look on their faces as they shouted. We have followed General Meng for tens of thousands of years. We have been through a bloody path. If we wanted to rebel, we would have done so long ago. We swear that we will not admit to our crimes even if we die. Protect General Meng and return to Ink Cloud Sky to plead our case to His Majesty the Emperor. It's Han. Follow me. Let's fight with these despicable people. Protect General Meng. Meng Chanfeng's generals led the soldiers, led Huiya, and Generals Yu, and S people's people, kill and killed. Yuqi ordered loudly. He did not intend to leave anyone alive. Now, the Dream Army's actions gave him an excuse to do so. Therefore, more than 100 masters attacked at the same time. The Dream Army's zombies also rushed forward fearlessly. The internal battle of Mo Yun Tian immediately began. The moment the 2 sides came into contact, the scene was extremely tragic. Almost at the moment of collision, countless pieces of flesh and blood flew everywhere. More than 100 Dream Army soldiers fell down. Although they had the advantage in numbers, their cultivation level was far from the opponents. They were not a match at all. Meng Huiya stood there in a daze. His eyes were empty, and his mind was no longer there. However, a drop of blood splattered onto his face, causing his face to twitch. Following that, more drops of blood splattered onto his face. Meng Huiya's body suddenly trembled, as if he had just woken up from a dream. Seeing that his subordinates were being slaughtered, Meng Huiya's eyes widened and his hair stood up in anger. General! Hurry up and leave! A deputy general vomited blood and shouted in grief and indignation. Only if we go back alive can we have the chance to complain. This is clearly Yuji's trap. They want to kill all of us. General, hurry up and leave. Countless people shouted together. They used their lives and their bodies to stop the enemy and give Meng Huya a chance to escape. At this moment, Meng Huya almost cried. Brothers, you are too stupid. Why don't you understand? His Majesty the Sky Emperor has already said that we are rebels. Even if we go back and meet His Majesty the Sky Emperor, how can this result be changed? Even if he knew that he was in the wrong, how could a celestial emperor go back on his word and retract his order for a subordinate? Blood continued to splatter, and people continued to fall. Meng Huya's eyes gradually turned red. Suddenly, there was a loud roar, and an extremely powerful force suddenly appeared. It separated the two sides. Bang! Meng Huya's palm smashed the head of the Dream Slayer army's expert. Blood splattered everywhere. Meng Huya's body flashed, and he stood straight in front of his subordinates. He stared at the 100 experts in front of him and said hoarsely, Come at me. Don't kill my brothers. His voice was hoarse and low, but it was filled with despair and madness. He paused, then used all his strength to shout, Don't kill my brothers. Bang! His clothes suddenly exploded, revealing the soft armor underneath. The jade belt that bound his hair exploded with a bang, and his long hair fluttered in the air. His aura of death was impressively displayed. Meng Huya, you finally stopped hiding and attacked your comrades. The person in front looked at Meng Huya with some mockery. You finally want to face the Sky Emperor's power? If you attack, you will be accused of treason. Meng Huya smiled bitterly. If I don't attack, the result will be like this, won't it? At this point, I, Meng Huya, have nothing to say. Even if I, Meng Huya, die, I have a clear conscience. Can you all have a clear conscience? Justice is in everyone's heart. Black is black, white is white. Meng Huya said hoarsely. When he said this, he was filled with a sense of powerlessness. Obviously, he knew that things had come to this point. Justice was no longer in everyone's heart. How could he distinguish between black and white? As long as he died, everything related to him would sink to the bottom of the sea forever. He would never be able to rise again. Ha! Meng Huya, since you jumped out yourself, we will not have any psychological burden to deal with you. The person laughed. Come forward and accept your death. More than 100 people launched a new round of attacks at the same time. Boundless violent chi rage, covering the sky and the earth. It enveloped Meng Huya and the Dream Slayer army. I said, Come at me. Don't kill my brothers. Meng Huya roared and fought back with all his strength. With a boom, the two sides once again fell into a bitter and bloody battle. Yu Qi still stood at the edge of the battlefield with his hands behind his back. He looked indifferently at the flesh and blood flying everywhere. His originally calm face finally showed a cruel and ferocious smile. As long as Meng Huya died, his Dream Slayer army would inevitably collapse. His strength would be on par with Martial Mu. It would not be a waste to sacrifice so many people's lives. At this moment, the Dream Slayer army was inexplicably sad and indignant. Under such a groundless injustice, everyone exerted 120% of their strength and fought with all their might. They knew that their strength was not enough, but they still fought to the last moment. Everyone in the Dream Slayer army was so angry that they were about to explode. Every one of us is loyal and devoted, and we do our best to serve our country. When have we ever betrayed our country? 10,000 people went on an expedition. Along the way, more than 8,000 of their brothers were buried in a foreign land. In the end, was the only thing they got in exchange for a crime of treason? Bang! Meng Huya slapped the chest of a celestial being expert in front of him. That person flew backward with blood spurting out. His sternum caved in. It was obvious that he was dead. Clang! Meng Huya's long sword suddenly broke. Then, a palm imprinted on his back. He staggered and turned his head to look. A middle-aged man with a white face and no beard was looking at him with a gloomy expression. White-faced wolf, it's you! You've been waiting for this day for a long time, haven't you? Meng Huya laughed bitterly. This white-faced wolf was Meng Huya's mortal enemy in Mo Yun Tian. This time, he finally seized the opportunity. Naturally, he would use his strength to deal with Meng Wuya. White-faced Wolf sneered. Everyone has the right to kill those who betray the country. As a citizen of Mo Yun Tian, everyone has the right to do so. As a soldier, I have the duty to do so. Meng Wuya laughed mockingly. Good, good, good. I didn't expect that the white-faced wolf, who has always cheated and deceived his superiors and subordinates, would be so righteous today. Admirable, admirable, ha 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 ha. White-faced Wolf's face darkened. He immediately attacked again. Meng Wuya retreated like a whirlwind. He brazenly charged into the enemy's crowd. He finally had no more scruples in his heart. He made up his mind and attacked with all his strength. I didn't expect that I, Meng Wuya, who had fought for Mo Yun Tian for my entire life, would actually fight with Mo Yun Tian's fellow soldiers. Fighting to the death with my former comrades. I actually died in the hands of my own people. Sure enough, the heavens are watching. That day, I ignored justice and deceived Chu Yang. Today, it may be my retribution. Meng Wuya suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were about to split open. Dying in the hands of treacherous villains like you, I really can't die in peace. He looked up to the sky and roared. I hate why I didn't make up my mind earlier and leave the army to fight the heavenly demons. Even if I died in the hands of the heavenly demons, it would be much more glorious than today's ending. The loyalty I had in the past is actually so laughable. As a person, I really can have a guilty conscience. Otherwise, I will regret it for life. Yu Qi stood with his hands behind his back and said coldly, Shut him up. A battle is a battle. Don't tell me you're still composing poems while fighting. Regret for life? I'll give you a bargain. Die, die. The so-called regret will end at the moment of death. Chapter 2168. Everyone agreed and attacked even more fiercely. One by one, the soldiers of the Dream Slayer army fell down in grief and indignation. One of the soldiers leaped into the air, ignoring the swords and sabers raining down on him like a torrential downpour. He desperately hugged a celestial being expert and bit down viciously without any regard for the rules. The celestial being expert shouted coldly, You're courting death! Hundreds of palms landed on the soldier's body, but he refused to let go. He hugged his opponent tightly. Even though his entire chest was bleeding and bleeding, he still refused to let go. The few soldiers of the Dream Slayer army next to him all fused with their swords and flew over on their swords. They first pierced through their comrade's body and then crashed into the celestial being expert with their swords. In an instant, the celestial being expert, who was still showing off his strength, turned into a human-shaped hedgehog. He roared with all his might, killing the soldiers that were hanging on his body one by one. He tried futilely to stuff his internal organs that had already flowed out back into his stomach. He struggled to survive, but he was sent flying by another person. He flew away together with his internal organs. He screamed miserably. Finally, he collapsed and breathed his last. This battle was just the tip of the iceberg. The intensity of the battle had reached its climax. Chu Yang, who was recuperating, was also shocked. Especially when he heard Meng Wuya's words, his heart suddenly moved inexplicably. I hate it! I hate that I didn't make up my mind to leave the army and fight the extraterrestrial demons. Even if I died at the hands of the extraterrestrial demons, it would be much more glorious than today's ending. That was Meng Wuya's roar, and it was also his inner thoughts at the moment. Chu Yang's eyes focused, and he could not help but think. The divine spirit of calamity flew out silently again and carefully entered the battlefield. On one hand, it greedily swallowed the extremely pure aura of the dead. On the other hand, it killed silently. With the addition of such a strong force, and the addition of the sneak attack, more than a dozen of the masters who had besieged Meng Wuya and the Dream Slayer army fell inexplicably in an instant. During this period of time, the divine soul of calamity had not only absorbed a sufficient amount of the aura of death, but its quality was also sufficiently pure. His overall strength had not only recovered to its original state, but it had also improved a lot compared to when he was in the Divine Source realm. Previously, his level of cultivation was slightly lower than Meng Wuya's, but now, he had surpassed him. Moreover, he was already infinitely close to the peak of the elementary level of the Sage realm. He was only one step away from reaching the next level of the Sage realm. With this strength, if he wanted to deal with Yuqi one-on-one and easily take her down, he would still need to rely on the characteristics of the Divine Soul of Calamity to fight a protracted battle to have a stable chance of winning. But to deal with the more than 100 people here, most of whom were at the celestial being level, it was more than enough. It could even be said that it was as easy as flipping one's hand. Meng Wuya suddenly felt that the pressure on his body was greatly reduced. Although he didn't see anything, he had fought with the Divine Soul of Calamity before. In an instant, he knew that the Divine Soul of Calamity must have made a move. Among the three parties present, only this guy could do it without leaving a trace. But he didn't say anything, just continued to fight. Now was really not the time to say anything. Whether it was thanks or anything else, it would only remind the other party to be on guard. Even if he exposed this point, it might have a negative impact on his own people. Now Meng Wuya hated Yuqi's people to the extreme. How could he remind them? Even though he was unwilling to be saved by the enemy, he couldn't care about anything else. Taking advantage of the Divine Soul of Calamity's great power, Meng Wuya finally had a chance to catch his breath. The next moment, an ancient monster with bright starlight suddenly escaped from his arms. As soon as this thing was taken out, there was suddenly a boundless pressure suddenly descending, and everyone present was shocked. Yuqi, who was watching the battle with his hands behind his back, was shocked and shouted, "Wind and thunder destruction!" He flew up and was about to stop Meng Wuya's hand. Meng Wuya said in a low voice, "Please block Yuqi." The volume of his words was extremely low. Even the people opposite him might not know who he was talking to and what he meant. But the Divine Soul of Calamity immediately understood. When the wind and thunder destruction was taken out just now, the Divine Soul of Calamity's heart immediately beat like a drum, and wanted to withdraw from the battle. After all, he still had lingering fear of the wind and thunder destruction. But Meng Wuya's words at this moment just happened to be what he wanted. Not only did he not want to withdraw, but his fighting spirit also increased greatly. He didn't want to be buried with these people. He had suffered from this thing for the first time. It was because he had experienced the horror of this thing that the Divine Soul of Calamity didn't dare to try it a second time even if he was beaten to death. And if he interfered with Yuqi, who had not yet joined the battle, not only could he completely avoid this thing, but he could also block the opponent's strongest master. He could use this opportunity to test his own strength in order to break through. It was a good thing to kill several birds with one stone. Immediately, he turned around and rushed towards Yuqi. The Divine Soul of Calamity simply stopped hiding and laughed strangely. "Deputy Commander Yu, come, let me be intimate with you." In the blink of an eye, he had already left the battlefield and turned into a black fog, facing Yuqi head-on. Yuqi was shocked when he saw this. Divine Soul of Calamity! Yuqi was also a master of the art of war. He immediately understood why the current battle situation was so strange. His side clearly had an overwhelming advantage, but he didn't know why the situation suddenly reversed. It turned out that it was this Divine Soul of Calamity that was causing trouble. "Meng Wuya, you really colluded with Chu Yang. Now, do you still have any grievances to complain about?" Yuqi roared, intending to completely shake the Dream Slayer army's morale, but the Divine Soul of Calamity had already pounced on him with a strange smile. Moreover, he even turned into a doppelganger and attacked Yuqi from all directions. Although Yuqi's cultivation was higher than the Divine Soul of Calamity, he was not very adapted to the Divine Soul of Calamity's special fighting style. Therefore, he had no means to deal with it in a short period of time. He could only passively defend, and naturally could not rush over to stop Meng Wuya's actions. Meng Wuya blushed and said in a low voice, "So what if it's destroyed? Your Majesty, you personally gave me this treasure before, But you didn't expect that I would use it on my own people, right? This is the cycle of nature. You planted the seeds yourself, and that's why today's results are the result. Who said that the heavens have no proof? Suddenly, he shouted. Wind and thunder annihilation! Meng Wuya used all his strength to instill all his cultivation into it, and activated the wind and thunder annihilation for the second time. Since the first time he dealt with the divine soul of calamity, the wind and thunder annihilation had exhausted all the accumulated energy. Meng Wuya knew that this item was the best weapon to deal with the divine soul of calamity. If he wanted to destroy Chu Yang, he must first deal with the divine soul of calamity. Before he could confirm whether the divine soul of calamity was finished, the wind and thunder annihilation must be maintained at its most powerful state. Therefore, during this period of time, he spared no expense in replenishing it. However, he didn't expect that he would use it in such a situation. At that moment, the destruction of wind and lightning was activated with the full power of a saint. Although the power could be unleashed, it was even more terrifying than when he was in the divine source realm. This was the masterpiece of the Black Cloud Heavenly Emperor, Yuan Tianjie. At this moment, the power it displayed was really as if it could destroy the world. At the moment when he activated the wind and thunder annihilation, Meng Wuya suddenly turned around, and used all his remaining strength to wrap up all his surviving subordinates with his powerful cultivation, and threw them far away. All of you, get lost! If anyone comes back, don't blame me, Meng Wuya, for not recognizing him as a brother. At the same time, the other experts also realized the horror of this attack, and they all moved to stop and block it. Meng Wuya turned around at such a critical moment, and it was equivalent to exposing his back completely. He had no room to resist all the attacks. With a few cracking sounds, Meng Wuya didn't know how many bones in his body were broken at this moment. His entire back was already devoid of flesh and blood, and only his pale white bones could be seen. Furthermore, the bones were filled with sword and knife wounds, and bone fragments were flying everywhere. However, he still stood upright, and actually endured this round of attacks, and still sent all his subordinates away. Not good! Retreat quickly! This bastard is crazy, he wants to perish together with us. Everyone leave quickly! The remaining 70+ people all shouted in panic, but it was already too late for them to leave. The wind and thunder annihilation was officially activated. Boom! The entire earth shook violently. The ground within a radius of 10,000 feet leaped up for 30 feet in an orderly manner, as if jumping high. Then, it fell down again. Countless cracks appeared on the ground, gradually spreading out with a crackling sound. Puff, puff, puff! When the 70-something people under Yuchi faced this attack, all of them were sent flying without exception. 30-something people had their bodies pierced through by the white light in midair, and they were torn to shreds. They died and their Tao vanished. The reason why these people died the earliest was because their cultivation was relatively low, and they were all below the heavenly human level. As for the others, they all began to vomit blood one after another. Even the 4 saint-level experts couldn't help but spit out blood at this moment, and their chi and blood were in turmoil. There were also a few people who fell from empty gunny sack, and they fell to the ground, and no longer made a sound. It was just a wind and thunder annihilation, and under one attack, 2/3 of the top experts under Moyun Tian Yuchi were killed. Now there were less than 30 people who were still standing, and these people were all seriously injured. Even if they still had battle power, it was also greatly reduced. Yuchi originally, with his saint-level cultivation, plus the other treasures bestowed upon him by Heavenly Emperor Ink Cloud, he had great confidence in stopping this catastrophe from happening. But he was entangled by the divine soul of the calamity. He could only watch helplessly as his subordinates turned into ashes one by one. He was so angry that the vital energy and blood in his chest surged, almost spitting out blood. Chu Yang! Yuchi roared angrily as he fought. You despicable person, I gave you face, but you don't want it. I gave you a fair chance, but you let the divine soul of the calamity trick me. Chapter 2169 Chu Yang coughed and said. Deputy Commander Yu, you're wrong. That tribulation divine soul is a senior expert, and not my subordinate. He has always dealt with whoever he doesn't like. It really has nothing to do with me. But generally speaking, as long as one's appearance isn't too bad and isn't too bad, he won't do anything to them. Deputy Commander Yu, you were attacked by the tribulation divine soul because your appearance is really a bit ugly. Although your appearance is given by your parents, and it's not a problem, you still have the nerve to come out and show off when you're already like this. It seems that it's your fault, Deputy Commander Yu. The tribulation divine soul laughed strangely. That Chu Yang's words are really right. They've simply spoken to my heart. You said that you're not as good looking as Tan Tan, but you still have the nerve to come out and meet people. You said that who can give you face? The tribulation divine soul's words could be said to have a great origin. The tribulation divine soul could be considered a person who had seen a lot in his life. But among the ugliest people he had seen in this generation, Tan Tan was undoubtedly second to none. He was at the top of the list, and no one could compete with him. Now, the divine soul of calamity had no choice but to bring out Tan Tan in order to highlight Yi's ugly appearance. But it truly felt that it had gone against its conscience when it said these words. So, even the speed of its attack had been somewhat slow. Tan Tan was healing his injuries. When he heard this, he immediately muttered with some dissatisfaction. What do you mean by not as good looking as me? You bastard, do you know how to talk? How can that guy compare to this great master's little finger? No, it's my little toe. Chu Yang, Chu Lur, and the others couldn't help but stifle their laughter. Yuchi was so angry that his liver hurt when he heard this. Although he still didn't know who Tan Tan was at this moment, but since the other party had brought it up like this, there was no doubt that it was an ugly person. However, although the attack of the divine soul of calamity was slightly slowed down due to its guilty conscience, it was still like a storm. In a short period of time, even if Yulai wanted to, he had no time to speak. He could only roar in anger. Just by looking at the situation, it was basically a tacit agreement. The greatest advantage of the divine soul of calamity was that it was not afraid of being hit. Swords, knives, fists, and feet were completely immune to it. As for what it was most afraid of, or rather, the only thing it was afraid of, was soul attacks. But to be honest, there were not many people in the world who could cause damage to the divine soul of calamity. At this moment, it was as if Yulai was fighting against the air. Every punch and every kick was hitting cotton. That kind of feeling of being unable to exert strength made him feel extremely uncomfortable. Fortunately, his cultivation was a level higher than the tribulation spirit. Otherwise, he would have been killed by the tribulation spirit in just a few punches and kicks. Even so, victory was still within the grasp of the divine soul calamity. This was because the reign was still within the range of the divine soul calamity. It was just that this cycle was relatively long, perhaps 30 to 50 years, perhaps 300 to 500 years. Of course, in the short term, the tribulation spirit was still in the position of being beaten up. On the other side, after Meng Hui's attack, the destruction of wind and thunder had carried too much energy, and the load was too high. In the end, it shattered on the spot and turned into a pile of iron scraps. However, the strong backlash caused by the destruction of wind and thunder had severely shaken Meng Hui's internal organs. Coupled with the previous wave of heavy attacks, although Meng Huia could still stand, he couldn't move a single finger. Even his consciousness was gradually becoming blurry. The full strength of the four sages and the combined efforts of the 70 celestial beings to defend. If the destruction of wind and thunder was not in Meng Hui's hands, there would be nothing left of Meng Huia now. In the distance, hundreds of Dream Slayer army soldiers who were covered in cuts and bruises were desperately running back. They were crying and cursing as they ran. General Dream, we will live and die with the general. Kill this bunch of bastards. Nearby, the 4 saint-level experts were the ones with the highest cultivation among the group. Although they were unavoidably injured by the previous attack, it wasn't too serious. At this moment, they were already able to stand up shakily. dense white chi was emitting from their bodies. It was obvious that they were quickly recovering from their injuries. This was the terrifying thing about sages. They wouldn't be injured easily. Even if they were injured, they could quickly recover. This level of strength was not something that could be compared to those below the sage realm. Of the remaining 20 or so people who were lucky enough to survive, a few stood up. Most of them were sitting up. These people's conditions were very similar. They were all bleeding from their 7 orifices. Although it was very scary, in fact, their lives were not in danger. Although the destruction of wind and thunder was overbearing and powerful, its greatest use was still to attack the soul. Even if a Sage Realm expert used all his strength, it was impossible to kill so many high-level experts at once. Meng Wuya stubbornly stood upright, trying his best to maintain his consciousness that was about to dissipate. He clearly saw that his subordinates were desperately running back. He wanted to stop them, wanted to scold them, but before he could open his mouth to speak, mouthfuls of blood had already spilled out from his mouth. His eyes were filled with endless anxiety and helplessness. "Brothers, I risked my life to launch this attack, hoping to cover your escape. Now that you've come back, aren't you seeking your own death? If that's the case, what's the point of my sacrifice?" However, although he wanted to say these words, he no longer had the strength to say them. In the next moment, his upright body finally reached its limit, and he fell forward like a golden mountain toppling a jade pillar. Just before he fainted, he heard a weak voice saying fiercely, "There's a path to heaven, but you don't want to take it. There's no door to hell, but you barged in. You've come back just in time. Let's catch you all in one fell swoop." Meng Wuya panicked and suddenly lost all consciousness. The Dream Slayer army had already rushed back. When they saw Meng Wuya lying on the ground silently, there was almost no flesh on his back. All that was left were his bones. Immediately, everyone let out a furious roar. "General! General Meng! General, what's wrong with you? Revenge for the general!" These people had lived and eaten with Meng Wuya for tens of thousands of years. How deep was their relationship? Besides, Meng Wuya had never fought with anyone except when he gave orders. Everyone loved and respected him wholeheartedly. At this moment, when they saw Meng Wuya lying on the ground miserably, it was hard to look at whether he was dead or alive. Suddenly, they all went crazy. However, even though these saints were all heavily injured, their cultivation was still there. Although these soldiers were considered experts in the martial world, they were still far from enough to deal with these relatively ordinary soldiers. Coincidentally, at this moment, there seemed to be a change. Chu Yang said in a clear voice, "Yu Qi, marshal you, I've finished recuperating. Come, I'll have a fair fight with you." Yu Qi was so angry that he almost exploded. Previously, he did not deal with Chu Yang because he wanted to achieve his long-term political goals. He must first take down Meng Wuya and completely eliminate the internal trouble. Who would have thought that the divine soul of tribulation would suddenly intervene? He had already violated the agreement with him. Meng Wuya's desperate attack of wind and thunder annihilation was also something that he did not expect. Now, almost everyone on his side was injured, and they were still fighting. At the critical moment when he was about to succeed, Chu Yang actually jumped out energetically and wanted to have a fair fight? Fair your ass! You're simply taking advantage of people's difficulties and hitting them when they're down. Do you have any shame? Do you still have any? Bai Yu Chen and the others also stood up like lively dragons and tigers as Chu Yang issued this order. They then flew towards the battlefield in a dignified manner. Therefore, Tan Tan took the lead and shouted, "That Yu Xingjie! You mustn't believe the words of that old man, Tribulation Divine Soul. You should quickly come and take a look at this great Master Tan. You must know that this great Master Tan is much more handsome than you. The two of us aren't on the same level. There's no comparison between us. Comparing you with me is a kind of blasphemy." Yuchi looked over. He was really a little curious. How narcissistic was the other party that he could say such shameless words? But with one look, he was so angry that he was about to go crazy. It turned out that this guy was that Tan Tan. It turned out that he was the one who robbed with this demon. It was such an ugly ghost. Originally, he thought that a person who could say such narcissistic words should have a good human appearance. At least, he should be passable. But this guy was at most 30% human. The other 70% was simply an evil ghost. The divine soul of tribulation actually said that he was more handsome than him. Humans should at least have some self-awareness and a sense of shame. How could the two of them say such words? Don't you feel embarrassed? At this moment, the Dream Slayer army only had 700 to 800 remaining soldiers. As for Yuan Tianji's side, because of a miscalculation just now, under Meng Wuya's wind and thunder annihilation, only 30 to 40 injured soldiers were left. As for the others, they had all become corpses. On Chu Yang's side, although they had a short rest, they had just gone through a big battle. So, each of them was also injured. They were far from being in perfect condition. Naturally, they were not a fresh army. Now, the three sides were in a state of being defeated, with a garden full of wounded soldiers. Now that they were confronting each other, just from the visual effect, everyone was in a very sorry state, everyone was very sullen, and everyone was covered in wounds. In addition, everyone was filled with hatred. They stared at each other like fighting cocks. The Dream Slayer army was sullen and angry. They were loyal to the team they were fighting with, but they were labeled as traitors for no reason. They had a home but could not return. Bai Yu Chen and the others were sullen and angry. They were implicated for no reason. They had a home but could not return. As for Yu Qi's side, he was also sullen and angry. Originally, it was easy to capture the enemy, but suddenly, his subordinates were heavily injured. Even so, the outcome of the battle was still the same. But at the last moment when the outcome was decided, a meddlesome person suddenly came out to meddle in other people's business. These few days, my friends from the publishing house are here with me. I have to entertain them, so the updates are a little irregular. Please understand. It will be back to normal by the day after tomorrow. Then I will compensate them one by one. Please believe me. Chapter 2170. But in terms of overall strength, Yu Qi's side still had the upper hand, followed by Chu Yang's side. Meng Wuya's side had the most people, but was now the weakest side. Chu Yang waved his hand. Send someone to save General Meng first. I don't want him to die like this. Chu Lur looked around. It seemed that no one was willing to do this job, so she had to do it herself. She gently carried Meng Wuya's mangled body back. She didn't dare to use any strength. Based on Chu Lur's observation, this body seemed to have a subtle intuition that it would fall apart at any time. The saint on the opposite side was so angry that his nose was almost crooked. Chu Yang, do you still have a position? Meng Wuya chased you for 130,000 miles and killed so many of your people. Now that things have come to this, you still want to save him? Isn't this making your subordinates bitterly disappointed? This person was quite good at finding weaknesses. After seeing that Bai Yu Chen and the others didn't listen to Chu Yang's orders, he began to sow discord. Bai Yu Chen and the others showed undisguised mockery on their faces. The reason why they didn't move was definitely not because they were bitterly disappointed. Perhaps there was hatred. After all, so many of their comrades had died previously. But at this moment, Meng Wuya's experience was almost the same as theirs. They were all forced to the point of being homeless by one person and one order. They were in the same boat. At this moment, the only thing that Bai Yu Chen and the others felt was grief for the loss of their kind. From the experience of Meng Wuya and the others, they thought of their own experience, and felt infinite sympathy from the bottom of their hearts. As for matters of life and death, everyone had their own positions. There would be hatred, and they wouldn't even forget it. But when it came to enmity, it really couldn't be said to be. On the battlefield, it was life and death. How could there be much reason to talk about? Chu Yang smiled faintly and said, It seems that it's not your place to worry about how I do things. Who do you think you are? Do you think you have the right to criticize my decisions? That person flew into a rage. Chu Yang, don't think that you have the upper hand. In my opinion, you're still far from being able to do that. You can't even withstand a single blow. Chu Yang squinted his eyes. Is that so? Why don't I have the self-awareness that you say? You're all talk and no action. Were you taught by your master's wife? Could it be the legendary invincible mouth cannon? Hearing Chu Yang's powerful and resonant words, all the saints on the other side were enraged. Anger rose from their hearts, and their guts grew. Ignorant junior, boasting shamelessly. In their eyes, even though Chu Yang had some luck, some tricks, and some small tricks, but in the end, he was still a nobody. Or rather, he was still an ant. That was all. Although this ant had once killed Mo Yuntian's primordial separate path, and that massacre had caused a sensation for a while, according to the investigation, that massacre was done by Chu Yang using the secret technique of life. It had nothing to do with Chu Yang's strength. As for why he could use the secret technique of life and not die, although it was a little shocking, it was ultimately because someone had saved him. It was not something that he could do. Taking a step back, Chu Yang's massacre that day was not something that the saints present could not do. Now, seeing Chu Yang speaking like this in front of them, and spouting nonsense, they could not help but be furious. They could not tolerate it. That saint said coldly, "Junior Chu Yang, if you want to live longer, you should pay more attention to what you say. You can't afford to offend anyone." Chu Yang's eyes flashed sharply, and he said lightly, "I don't know who I can afford to offend. Are you saying that you're more difficult to offend than Heavenly Emperor Mo Yuan Tianjie? At least, I've already offended Yuan Tianjie, and even killed his son. And I'm living quite well now. No, it should be much better than before. I've discovered that my recent advancement in strength has far exceeded before. It's really too satisfying," Chu Yang said. "As the saying goes, people will die if they compare themselves to others, and goods will be thrown away if they compare. If you admit that you can't compare to Yuan Tianjie, you might as well think more about what you say. Perhaps you can live longer." Hearing this saint was instantly enraged, and could no longer suppress it. He was already in a fit of anger, and now he heard this sentence. As the saying goes, if the master is humiliated, the servant will die. Since Chu Yang had already said such words, how could he still endure it? He leaped forward, and was about to make a move. "Wait!" Yu Qi shouted loudly, and forcefully pushed away the divine soul of the calamity. With a vertical shift, he came to the middle of the confrontation between the three parties. Since Yu Qi could become one of the few people in Mo Yuntian's military, his knowledge and experience were naturally not ordinary. He had already raised Chu Yang's level of danger to a level higher than Meng Wuya's. Not to mention other things, would a master who could casually control a saint-level divine soul of calamity be an ordinary person? Right now, Meng Wuya's forces were on the decline. In fact, Meng Wuya's life was like a candle in the wind. He would die without a doubt as long as no one came to his aid. Moreover, there were still hundreds of defeated soldiers left. Even if he was entangled by the divine soul of the calamity, his subordinates would be able to deal with them in a matter of minutes as long as Chu Yang didn't intervene at this delicate juncture. "I wonder what Deputy Commander Yu has to say," Chu Yang sneered. Yu Qi took a light breath. "Chu Yang, this matter is our Mo Yuntian's internal affairs, but it belongs to the category of private affairs. You are also a person of great status, why bother to intervene?" Chu Yang smiled. "Deputy Commander Yu thinks too highly of me. I didn't expect that I would actually become a person of great status in Deputy Commander Yu's eyes. I feel honored. Since Deputy Commander Yu has said so, logically and emotionally, I shouldn't intervene." Hearing this, Yu Qi was overjoyed. He secretly criticized Chu Yang in his heart. This Chu Yang is after all young, and he settled it with just a few words. But he heard Chu Yang continue. "It's just that if I really don't intervene, may I ask Deputy Commander, after this matter is settled, will you let me go?" Yu Qi's smile instantly froze on his face, and he was speechless. Let go? Logically and emotionally, no matter what, it was impossible to let Chu Yang go. Chu Yang was the biggest target of their long and arduous journey. How could they let him go? Yu Qi was silent for a while, then he said, Chu Yang, our Mo Yuntian's previous enmity with you is a huge enmity of life and death. But now, it's time for us Mo Yuntian to quell the internal strife. The martial world has its own rules, and the imperial court has its own laws. Please step aside for the time being. This marshal is deeply grateful for your kind intentions. Chu Yang sneered. Deputy Commander, you are really eloquent. You are indeed the superior of that person who is invincible in talking. You are much better than him. You want to dismiss me with just a few words of courtesy? Deputy Commander, are you too confident in your talking skills, or do you think that I am young and ignorant and can be easily bullied? His smile was even colder. Since we are already destined to have an irreconcilable enmity, why would I care about your internal strife? The more internal strife you have, the more advantageous it is for me. Since you have internal strife, good, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. Why should I step aside? Are you grateful for my kindness? I can't afford such kindness. If I give it, no one will be grateful, and I will be laughed at as an idiot. Yu Qi frowned, and his expression became colder. At this moment he understood that Chu Yang was determined to intervene in this matter. Let's take a step back. Although Meng Wuya had been chasing me all this while, I have always admired resolute men. Chu Yang raised his head proudly. If Meng Wuya was killed by me when he was chasing after me, then he deserved to die. However, I can't bear to see such a heroic figure being wronged by you all. Chu Yang turned his head and looked at Meng Wuya, who was badly mutilated. His eyes were full of pride. Meng Wuya and I also have an irreconcilable blood feud. However, I would rather that General Meng died in my hands, or on the battlefield against the heavenly demons, than die here. Die in the most despicable political struggle, and become a sacrificial pawn. Chu Yang's words were powerful and resonating. Some of the 800 Dream Slayer army soldiers who had survived began to sob softly. Chu Yang's words were extremely honest and sincere. He was definitely not trying to win people's hearts. However, it was precisely because of this that these hot-blooded men were truly moved. They might have their own creed in life, and wouldn't be recruited by Chu Yang. But they didn't want their brothers, the people they respected, to be sacrificed like this. They didn't want to die in such a humiliating way. Moreover, they would be branded with a traitorous mark that could never be washed away because of framing. Yu Qi turned his head to look at the people on his side, and then looked at Chu Yang's side. He quickly weighed the pros and cons in his heart and came to a conclusion. In terms of high-end strength, including himself, he had a total of 5 sages on his side. He had even reached the sage level. The other side had the divine soul of a calamity, 2 sages of the demon royal family, and Chu Yang's strength was unfathomable. He seemed to be at the peak of the celestial being level, but his strength was definitely not to be underestimated. He might not be weaker than a sage. As for the rest, although their strength was not bad, they did not have the ability to affect the final outcome of the battle. Purely based on this analysis, his side still had a slight advantage, but only a slight advantage. It was hard to say that they would definitely win. If a battle really broke out now, then the most optimistic result would be victory. However, the people on his side, including himself, might not be more than 3 people who could survive. If they were defeated, at most, he would be the only one who could escape. The others would definitely die here. Such a result, no matter which one it was, even if it was the best and most optimistic result, even if Chu Yang and Meng Wuya's people were all killed, for Yu Qi, the loss would not be worth the gain. Because those who were still standing in Yu Qi's camp were the absolute backbone of his forces, and they were also loyal to him. If these people died, the blow to Yu Qi's forces would definitely be more serious than the blow of Mu Shuai losing Meng Wuya. Even Chu Yang and Meng Wuya would die in this battle. Yu Qi now felt that he could not afford to lose so many people. However, Chu Yang had already steeled his heart to interfere in this matter. This was a bit difficult to deal with, and he was in a dilemma. Tomorrow afternoon, after sending my friend back, I will start working overtime to pay off the debt. The day after tomorrow, I will try to pay off the debt in 1 or 2 days. Today is Yu Luoying Dai's birthday. Let us wish her a happy birthday and wish her a happy birthday. Well, don't worry, the book's little butterfly is about to be born. I saw a post from the deputy moderator and was very moved. I just want to say, with you guys I will not fall. I will always be with you, until you are tired of me. I have a lot of stories to write for you guys. I hope that all of you will laugh and be happy. If this happiness is brought to you by me, then it will be the glory of my life. Chapter 2171. Yu Jiao hesitated. If I let go of this opportunity, once Meng Huiya and the others leave, Chu Yang and the others will slip away again. Yu Jiao really didn't know when there would be such a good opportunity to annihilate the enemy again. Yu Jiao thought about it, and was actually a little hesitant. Not only was Yu Jiao hesitant, Chu Yang was also a little hesitant looking at the lineup over there. Although the people on Yu Jiao's side were a bunch of injured soldiers, each of their real combat power was still not to be underestimated. Especially those who could survive the destruction of wind and thunder, it proved that each of them was not ordinary. The weakest among them was almost at the same level as Bai Yuqin. Even if there was a slight gap, it was definitely not far off. On his side, only he and Tan Tan, and the divine spirit of the calamity could support. As for Meng Huiya's side, there was no one who could be used. There were also the 2 great elders of the demon clan. These 2 elders were in an awkward position. It was really inconvenient to confront Mo Yuntian head-on. It was hard to count on them. Once the war started, the other side would definitely not have it easy, but his side would also suffer heavy casualties. Forcing a war was really not a good idea. For a moment, Chu Yang was also a little hesitant about what to do. For a long time, the two were speechless. Deputy Commander Yu, since everyone cherishes their feathers, why don't I make a proposal to solve the current deadlock? What do you think? Chu Yang thought for a long time and finally made up his mind. Yu Jiao frowned and said, What do you mean? Previously, Deputy Commander Yu said that you want to have a fair fight with me. These words still linger in my ears. Chu Yang smiled and said, Since that's the case, why don't you and I have a fair fight? How about we settle this grudge once and for all? Yu Jiao stared at Chu Yang in disbelief. You and I? A fair fight? 1-on-1? He thought, how is this a fair fight? It's you who is looking for death, right? I have never seen someone who is so unafraid of death. If you say that the divine spirit of the calamity will fight 1-on-1 with me, I may be a little afraid. You fight? Let me fight. If I lose this battle, I will take my people and leave. I will never interfere with your Mo Yuntian quelling the internal strife. I don't care whether Meng Huiya is dead or alive. As for whether you still want to chase us after you deal with the internal strife, it's your choice. We'll just have to deal with whatever comes our way. Chu Yang said lightly. But if I win this battle in the end, I will take away General Meng and his subordinates. You're not allowed to pursue him. Yuqi laughed heartily. Since Villa Master Chu is so heroic, how can I have any doubts? I will make this bet with Villa Master Chu. If I lose, I will immediately bring my men back to Ink Cloud Sky. How could he still have the face to mention the matter of being hunted down? Of course, if I am lucky enough to win in the end, if Manor Master Chu is able to survive, you can still leave with your people. However, if you are unfortunate enough to perish, don't blame me for being merciless. I'm sure Manor Master Chu understands the logic of not giving in and not showing mercy. Thinking about it for a long time, this was simply a great deal that was guaranteed to win and not lose. It was simply no worse than a pie falling from the sky. He was at the peak of the saint level. Wouldn't it be a piece of cake for him to deal with Chu Yang, who was at the peak of the celestial level? How could there be any luck? Yuqichi wasn't the only one who thought this way. Even his subordinates and the Dream Slayer army had the same thought. Had Chu Yang gone mad? Some people even thought, could it be that Chu Yang was just putting on a show? Would he just admit defeat and run away after exchanging a few moves? Otherwise, how could he challenge a saint with his current celestial being peak stage? Even if Uncle Ma and Uncle Hu were peak stage saints, were to challenge Yuchi one-on-one, even if they weren't instantly killed, they would definitely have no chance of winning. With Chu Yang's pitiful celestial being peak stage cultivation, it was really not enough. At this moment, the wind and clouds in the sky were turbulent. Suddenly a majestic voice said, "The bet is established. A fair battle. I accept the arbitration of this battle." It was the people from the Demon Emperor's Heavenly Oath Division who were affected by the agreement between the two. This battle had already been recognized by heaven and earth. Everyone from both sides looked solemn. That's right, since this battle is a one-on-one battle between Villa Master Chu and me, then the divine spirit of the calamity cannot interfere in this battle. Yu Chi-Chi suddenly thought of the divine spirit of the calamity, and hurriedly added another condition. "Marshal Yu, since it's a one-on-one battle between you and me, what does it have to do with the divine spirit of the calamity?" The divine spirit of the calamity's name is not Chu Yang, and it wouldn't be so coincidental as to be called Yu Chi-Chi, right? Chu Yang laughed loudly. Yu Chi-Chi finally couldn't help but blush. It felt like he was gauging the stature of a great ruler with the yardstick of a villain. In just a few words, the way to end this three-way death match was decided. Even the others didn't have time to say anything to dissuade him. The people on Late Rain's side were sure that no one would dissuade Chu Yang. It was rare that Chu Yang would be so stupid as to take the initiative to court death. Naturally, they were happy to see such a brainless decision. They were just short of raising their hands to encourage him. But the people on Meng Wuya's side all had unconcealable worry on their faces. They had all fought with Chu Yang before. Chu Yang's cultivation was not bad. In terms of his age, both his cultivation and progress were extremely commendable. It was definitely a miracle for him to be at the peak of the celestial being level when they first fought. But he was still far behind Yu Chi-Chi. The soldiers of the Dream Slayer army were very sure that as long as Chu Yang was given some more time, perhaps 3 or 5 years, he would definitely surpass Yu Chi-Chi, but now, the gap between the two was still quite huge. There was a fundamental gap. To give a simple example, in the previous battle in the Black Hole, Chu Yang's performance was exceptionally outstanding. He was worthy of his name, a true stabilizing force. The results he obtained were also obvious to all. But this achievement was still within the scope of the celestial being level. If the person involved was Yu Chi-Chi, the Dream Slayer army would be hunted down. This was the fundamental difference between the sage level and those below it. Especially when Yu Chi-Chi was still at the sage level. So, Chu Yang's action of challenging Yu Chi-Chi alone was definitely a foolish act of seeking death. In addition to seeking death, he also wanted to completely destroy the Dream Slayer army's chances of survival. But the Dream Slayer army did not blame Chu Yang at all. If it were not for Chu Yang, they, including General Meng, would have been wiped out long ago. Now, Chu Yang even gambled his own life for the sake of their survival. In fact, even if Chu Yang had found an excuse to take his people away, no one would have blamed him. In terms of standpoints, the two sides were enemies. Even until now, this hostile relationship hadn't changed in the slightest. So, it was natural for Chu Yang to watch with folded arms. It was understandable. But the current situation was that not only did Chu Yang not leave, but he also wanted to have a decisive battle with Yu Chi-Chi for their survival. More importantly, the gap between the real cultivation of the two sides could only be described as the gap between heaven and earth. It could be said that Chu Yang had risked his life in order to save them. How could they not be moved by this reality? Then, he thought about how he and the others had chased after Chu Yang and the others for more than 100,000 miles under the leadership of Meng Wuya. Then, he thought about how Chu Yang had risked his life to save him and the others for the sake of justice in Jianghu. Righteous as the clouds, nothing more than this. Every soldier of the Dream Slayer army who was still alive could not help but feel a surge of emotions. One of the Dream Slayer army officers suddenly shouted, "Villa Master Chu, we appreciate your kindness. But we are all enemies, and our standpoints are different. You really don't have to make such a sacrifice for us. Villa Master Chu, please take your brothers and leave. If there is a next life, we will definitely be friends with Villa Master Chu. A few people shouted in unison. Villa Master Chu, please leave quickly. If there is a next life, we will be friends again. Chu Yang smiled faintly and said, There's no need to wait until the next life to talk about friendship. To be honest, I approve of this duel. I also want to use Deputy Commander Yu to verify how far my cultivation has progressed. It's not entirely for the sake of you. So, you don't have to worry too much. Everyone in the Dream Slayer army heard this and felt an indescribable warmth in their hearts. Chu Yan had clearly said this because he didn't want them to have more psychological burdens. So, he had taken everything on himself. But the more he said this, the more everyone acknowledged him in their hearts. Yu Jia smiled gloomily and said, Manor Master Chu, what a brilliant method of roping them in. It's a pity that time is not on our side. Otherwise, I'm afraid that these defeated soldiers would have surrendered to Manor Master Chu and die for you. An officer of the Dream Slayer army laughed in disdain. Yuchi, you despicable man. It's hard to judge a king's heart with your petty heart. We're happy to be roped in. What can you do about it? If it were you, we wouldn't even look at you. The Dream Slayer army roared with laughter and said, That's right. Who does Yuchi think he is? How can we accept such a person's roping? Do you think that Villa Master Chu is playing tricks? But we are happy to be fooled. Money can't buy our happiness. What can you do about it? Yuchi was so angry that his mouth was crooked and his eyes were slanted. He said, A group of deceitful and ignorant traitors. I will take good care of you later. Chu Jiang said calmly. Deputy Commander Yu, the outcome has not been decided yet. Is showing off your ability to sit in a high position? Come, let me see how you can sit in the position of Deputy Commander Mo Yutian with your true ability. Chapter 2172. At this moment, Tan Tan shouted, Ichi! Chu Yan heard this and glared at him. Tan Tan hurriedly changed his words. Senior Marshal Brother, I want to discuss something with you. Do you want me to fight with him? I will make him feel great. I will make him explode. I will make him feel satisfied. Chu Yang was speechless. Why does this guy speak so ambiguously? Can't he care about his identity a little? He wasn't afraid of losing face. So, he said hatefully, quickly go away. You'd better die as far as you can go. Tan Tan shrunk his neck and laughed dryly. He was speechless for a long time. But he couldn't help but say, Then, you must work harder. Make Vice Commander you feel good. Maybe Vice Marshal you will come looking for you every day to do it. Chu Yang rolled his eyes and was speechless for a long time. Why would a desperate life and death battle become so obscene and erotic when it comes out of Tan Tan's mouth? Talent? A genius? A demon? Yuchi was so angry that his face turned pale. He pointed at Tan Tan with a trembling finger. You ugly bastard! Wait until I deal with Chu Yang. I will let you know what it means to feel good. Oh, I am so scared! Tan Tan screamed. He suddenly covered his buttocks with his hands. He pinched his nose and twisted his buttocks. He said to Yuchi shyly, Oh, you are so bad! So bad! So bad! So bad! Everyone from both sides, without exception, collectively felt a layer of goosebumps rise on their bodies. Chu Yang's body floated out like a cloud. He rushed to the top of a mountain and shouted, Yuchi, quickly come up to meet your death! Hurry up and leave this place. Otherwise, if I continue to listen to Tan Tan talk like this, I may die of disgust before Yuchi hits. Yuchi's face was filled with black lines as he quickly flew up and chased after Chu Yang. This ugly bastard's mouth is comparable to 100,000 soldiers. I can't listen anymore. If I listen any longer, I will be so angry that I will bleed from my 7 orifices and die of anger. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the two figures flew far away like shooting stars. the two of them said in unison. Before the battle is over, none of you are allowed to attack. Therefore, the three sides confronted each other. Everyone was trying to heal their injuries. The Dream Slayer army gathered around Meng Wuya and carefully treated his injuries. When they saw Meng Wuya's bloody and unconscious body, they all had tears in their eyes. Occasionally, when they raised their heads and saw the enemy, their eyes would be filled with hatred. This was the case for all three parties. But no one dared to act blindly without thinking before Chu Yang and Yu returned. Yu Qi's army was naturally full of confidence in Deputy Commander Yu's cultivation. But they didn't know that Chu Yang's people were also full of confidence in Chu Yang. All was silent as they waited for the final result. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion in the distance, and then a sword light flashed, and another sword light soared into the sky like a dragon. At this moment, the blue sky lost its color. The battle at the pinnacle between the two of them had clearly begun with this rumble. This was Chu Yang's first time facing a saint-level expert head-on since his debut. In Chu Yang's battle history, this battle would be recorded in the annals of history. Like a thunderclap, the two magnificent sword lights collided in the sky. In an instant, they shattered into a sky full of stars, scattering in all directions. Then, a whistling sound rang out. On the opposite mountain, a silver light suddenly shone. Between heaven and earth, it actually turned bright silver in that instant. It was already afternoon. There was no wind and the sky was a little dark. But it was still considered bright. But the two whistling sword lights scraped the entire forest neatly. The whistling sound was like the gates of hell opening. The extremely sharp sword she even tore the white clouds in the sky into pieces. Seeing this scene, everyone looked at each other in horror. They never thought that the battle between the two of them would be so earth-shattering from the start. It was not strange for Yu Lao to have such a cultivation level, but Chu Yang had also reached such a level? To the extent that he was able to be on par with Yu Hyo, and not fall into a disadvantage at all. Such an outcome had undoubtedly shocked everyone to the point that their eyeballs almost popped out. Chu Yang, who was in the middle of the battle, only felt his blood boiling. That was an extremely strong fighting spirit, surging endlessly. This kind of surging majestic fighting spirit, especially when facing Yu Qi, and the huge pressure from the expert, made Chu Yang's heart burn fiercely. It was difficult to suppress. That was a kind of bloodthirsty fighting spirit that came from the bottom of his heart. An inexplicable impulse. It was as if the fighting spirit in his blood had suddenly exploded. The supreme power of the true spirit that he had just obtained from Yama's gorge suddenly surged and surged in his body. This power, as if without limit, aroused a strong reaction from the heaven-splitting divine technique. At the same time, it also aroused the fierce murderous spirit of the Calamity Sword. Although Chu Yang's expression remained unchanged, he could feel that he was already burning. It was a kind of fist-itching, hot-blooded emotion that yearned for a big battle. That was why he took the initiative to propose a battle with Yu Qi. But as soon as they exchanged blows, Chu Yang felt the horror of Yu Qi. Deputy Commander Mo Yuntian was indeed worthy of the title of a saint. His cultivation was really not just for show. Chu Yang could clearly feel that his strength was at least 2 levels lower than that of his opponents after the clash of swords. This was an essential difference. It was like a 4-digit number was definitely bigger than a 3-digit number. Even if it was 1,000 versus 100, it was still 1,000. Even though Chu Yang had a dantian that was endlessly transmitting power, and the power of the supreme true spirit was also agitating and surging at any time and place. However, under this sword strike, Chu Yang's body had only swayed a little, while Chu Yang himself had fiercely retreated 70 feet back. He couldn't even stand steadily. But at this moment, Chu Yang's fighting spirit was boiling. He retreated and then advanced again. Like a shadow, he launched a dense attack towards Yu Qi. His body was like a wisp of ethereal black smoke, suddenly advancing and retreating, suddenly forward and suddenly backward, changing unpredictably. Yu Qi's mouth held a trace of a sneer. His whole body remained upright and motionless. He was really as steady as a mountain. He counted the moves as he saw them, and broke them as he saw them. Chu Yang's attacks were like the waves of the sea. Each wave was higher than the previous one, and seemed to have no time to stop. But Yuqi was like a reef that stood in the sea for hundreds of millions of years. No matter how strong the wind and waves hit, he remained unmoved, everlasting. Although Yuqi seemed to be in a passive defensive position, in fact, he was waiting for Chu Yang to exhaust himself. As the saying goes, the first drum builds up the spirit, the second will weaken, and the third will exhaust. As long as Chu Yang's wave of tide-like attacks stagnated for a moment, he would welcome Yuqi's fierce counterattack. Regarding this point, the two people who were in the battle were naturally well aware of it. Offense had always been the best defense. Pure defense was undoubtedly much more difficult than pure offense. Yu Lao could passively endure Chu Yang's attacks without moving and was safe and sound. But if the two exchanged positions, and Chu Yang had to endure Yu Lao's crazy attacks like a storm, Chu Yang would definitely not be able to handle it. Chu Yang's cultivation was still much lower than Yuqi's. Therefore, Yuqi was not in a hurry. He had a card up his sleeve, and was calm and confident. Chu Yang's attacks were absolutely impossible to persist for a long time. It was impossible no matter how long his meridians were, and how vigorous his vitality was. I'd like to see how long you can last. When you can't hold on any longer, see if I don't teach you a lesson. Yu Chi was very proud of himself. His defense was not just a simple defense. Every strike he made contained the cultivation of a saint. As long as the weapons of both sides slightly touched, Chu Yang's body would shake violently due to the opponent's powerful counterattack. In such a battle atmosphere, and both sides were top-notch experts, a slight sway would reveal a fatal flaw, one that could be fatal. But Yuqi was cautious by nature. Before thinking about victory, he had to consider defeat first. Especially after he almost suffered a loss in his previous rash counterattacks, he had long adopted the idea of fighting steadily. Anyway, he already had the chance of winning in his hands. There was no need to take risks to win. He did not ask for merit, but to not make any mistakes. With his hundreds of thousands of years of pure cultivation, he would exhaust Chu Yang to death even if he had to. But he did not know that Chu Yang was secretly proud of himself at this moment. He was full of joy. This sparring opponent was really too tactful. In terms of the actual strength of the two sides, if Ichi did not care and made a strong counterattack, with Chu Yang's cultivation that had not completely integrated with the supreme true spirit, he would definitely not be able to hold on for too long. Not only would Chu Yang be defeated, even the chance of retreating in one piece would be very slim. But Yuqi was really too cautious. He did not dare to give it his all. This gave Chu Yang an extreme opportunity to make a move, consume his own cultivation to the limit, catalyze it internally and externally, and maximize the integration of the supreme true spirit. In fact, it was no wonder that Yuqi would make such a choice. No matter what, a sage-level expert, as long as he was not a battle maniac, would make the same choice as Yuqi throughout history. How many people could be like Chu Yang, who dared to deliberately consume his own cultivation in order to break through at the last minute? That was simply the most unwise act of courting death. After showing a few flaws in a row, seeing that Yuqi was still biding his time, Chu Yang was completely relieved. But he became more and more presumptuous. One ray of cold light pierces 10,000 fathoms. Chu Yang's body flew back like a meteor. Then, he retreated and advanced again, bringing along 10,000 fathoms of fine light. Good sword! Good move! Yuqi shouted when he saw the situation. With a smile at the corner of his mouth, he calmly faced the attack. What harm is there in slaughtering the whole world? Chu Yang shouted again and made another fierce move. Good sword technique! A sharp will buried deep will not change! The tribulation sword technique was displayed vividly from Chu Yang's hands like moving clouds and flowing water, but it carried a thunderous momentum that swept across the world. The boundless cold sword aura rushed toward Yuqi in a perilous manner. Chapter 2173. Yuqi resisted 8 moves in a row, but he felt more and more that his opponent's swordsmanship was marvelous and unparalleled, and the pressure was getting bigger and bigger. With every move that the opponent made, he had to defend with all his might. Even so, there were still sword energies that he missed. These sword energies that he couldn't defend against could only be resisted with his saint-level cultivation. Fortunately, Chu Yang hadn't reached the saint level yet. If Chu Yang had reached the level of a saint, even if he was at the primary level of a saint, this round of attacks alone would be enough to teach Yuqi a lesson. But it was also because Chu Yang hadn't reached the level of a saint that this round of attacks that clearly had the upper hand didn't hurt Yuqi's foundation. Yuqi had been on the battlefield all his life and had seen a lot, but this was the first time he encountered such a marvelous and peerless swordsmanship. Even though he was in the middle of the battle, he couldn't help but be dazzled. His interest in this battle was getting stronger and stronger. This level of swordsmanship, I must unravel the mystery behind it. Chu Yang's cultivation is only at the peak of heavenly human level, but he can actually force my defense to be incomplete with this swordsmanship. If I can master such a peerless swordsmanship, won't I have the upper hand and win against Martial Mu in the future? Yuqi's eyes became more dignified. He stared at Chu Yang's hands, carefully guessing the mystery of each of Chu Yang's moves. But what he didn't know was that the tribulation swordsmanship had to be used together with the heaven-multiplying divine technique to have such an effect. Without the heaven-multiplying divine technique, even if he could learn all the stances perfectly, it would be difficult for him to unleash even 1/10,000th of the power of the moves. A blade across the sky for 10,000 autumns, this road leads to the netherworld. Chu Yang shouted repeatedly, and sword light flew everywhere. On Yuqi's side, sword light was also flying everywhere. It was just that he changed from an all-around defense to a defensive attack at the beginning because he found that Chu Yang's swordsmanship seemed to be endless. The more he fought, the greater the pressure he felt. There were already 7 to 8 crisscrossing white marks on his body. Although they didn't really cut his skin and hurt his body, he still felt pain. This situation is not good, we can't continue like this. Yuqi's mind turned. We must find a way to contain it. The best way to restrain Chu Yang was undoubtedly to fight offense with offense. In terms of general martial arts principles, once one side launched a strong counterattack, the other side would have to put a part of their strength into defense. In this way, it would be impossible to launch an all-out attack. Yuqi was also thinking of this idea. But today's battle situation had completely subverted this principle. Only then did Yu Jie increase his counterattack. On the opposite side, Chu Yang not only did not concentrate on defending, but instead attacked even more crazily. That heaven-overlapping divine technique was operating at an unprecedented super-high speed. Both his dantians were operating at the same time. At the same time, it formed a fierce vortex, attracting the power of the supreme true spirit in his body, slowly drawing it out from his bones and muscles. It gradually converged into his dantian, replenishing his own consumption. This peculiar process was progressing at a snail's pace. If Yu Lao knew about this situation, he would definitely go all out to counterattack and completely kill off this process. Because, in his estimation, Chu Yang's dantian should be close to exhaustion at this moment. But at this moment, it was once again filled with energy. Not only did it not show any signs of exhaustion, but the golden liquid in his dantian was gradually increasing at a considerable speed. Chu Yang's earth-shattering attack did not weaken at all. Instead, it became fiercer and fiercer. The magnificent sword light broke through the air, and actually made a rumbling sound like thunder and lightning. But in Yu Lao's eyes, this was Chu Yang at the end of his tether. He could not help but be secretly happy, and his defense became more and more stable. I'd rather hide myself completely, but exchange it for the green sky massacre frenzy. Chu Yang once again let out a hoarse roar. His body turned, and suddenly disappeared. His whole person had also turned into a brilliant sword light. Amidst the dazzling brilliance of the stars, an extremely frenzied murderous intent swept towards Yu Lai like a tidal wave. Ha ha, Manor Master Chu, are you finally at your wits' end? An arrow at the end of its flight, what's there to be afraid of? Yu Lao clearly felt the decline of the opponent's sword momentum. He could not help but laugh loudly. He felt that victory was in his hands, and the overall situation was in his hands. The two big sword moves converged, and came over mightily. Behind the sword light, Chu Yang's figure suddenly reappeared, and he shouted, "Not necessarily!" Then, another 4 moves were brazenly launched. Big and blunt without a sharp edge, the sky wants to sink, no blade and no cold sword intent is dense. Life and death is the beginning of the sword's sharpness, only the vicissitudes of life know the silent soul. These 4 moves were a desperate sword technique that risked one's life to take another's life. The consecutive attacks caused Yu Lai to be flustered. The last strike of the sword head was hidden in the brilliant and dazzling sword light. Chu Yang, together with the sword hilt, crashed into Yu Lao's chest and abdomen. Yu Lao let out a muffled groan. His body finally could not remain still like a mountain. His whole body flew backwards, and he only felt a sharp pain between his chest and abdomen. His eyes finally revealed a strong anger. Since he had been promoted to a saint-level expert, how long had it been since he was injured? It had really been a long time. But unexpectedly, he had not expected that he would be injured by a junior who was not even a saint-level expert. This move was fierce, overbearing, and unexpected. It finally caused a super expert like Yu Lao to be injured a little. After Yu Lao's move, he retreated 100 feet. Using his hands to cover his chest and abdomen, he slowly raised his head and said in a deep voice, "Chu Yang, good sword technique." On the opposite side, Chu Yang was sweating profusely. He gasped for breath and sneered, "This is not good enough. The real good sword technique is yet to come," Yu Lao said coldly. "Unfortunately, you have succeeded in angering me. Whether the sword technique is good or not is meaningless to me. Chu Yang, today, I will kill you." Chu Yang smiled faintly and leaped up. "Yu Lao, don't play with words. In the end, who will kill who is not certain yet." Suddenly, there was a loud shout. "The world of mortals is the path of ruthlessness. Don't restrain your blade when you kill the world." A crazy sword aura actually pressed over brazenly again. This wave of attack was a large-scale indiscriminate attack. The whole world seemed to be filled with Chu Yang's sword light. From top to bottom, it was all densely packed sword mountains and sword seas. Between heaven and earth, there was only the sword. Seeing this, Yu Lao let out a long roar and flew over. With a lift of his long sword, he actually took the initiative to enter the area of sword light and sword shadows. Then clap, 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 clap. The continuous sound of collisions sounded continuously, and finally concluded with a loud bang. Yu Lao, who was submerged in the sword mountains and sword seas, suddenly reappeared. His body spun, and as if he was unsteady, he staggered back. On the opposite side, Chu Yang's situation seemed to be worse. His whole body spun and flew out in a sorry state. He flew out for more than 300 feet before he returned to the ground. He couldn't stand still and staggered, falling back for more than 100 feet again. On the ground, 2 deep marks were drawn by his feet. The 2 people who stopped their bodies looked up at each other at the same time. Their hearts were filled with awe. At this moment, Yu Lao finally felt a bone-chilling real crisis. On his shoulder, there was an additional bloodstain. Although it was only a superficial wound and couldn't even be considered a minor injury, Yu Lao understood another thing. The saint golden body that he relied on the most, which he thought was unbreakable, was no longer unbreakable in front of Chu Yang. Chu Yang's sword could actually threaten the safety of his physical body. Yu Lao's heart was filled with vigilance, and he couldn't calm down for a long time. But Yu Lao didn't know that the shock in Chu Yang's heart was even more unparalleled. This was the first time Chu Yang met such a powerful opponent. He used the calamity sword moves consecutively. If the opponent could block it, he would block it. If he couldn't, he would just use his physical body to block it. Even with the unparalleled sharpness of the calamity sword and his current extreme cultivation, he couldn't pierce through the opponent's body at all. It must be known that Chu Yang had been trying to break through the opponent's defense with the calamity sword. But previously, Other than adding white marks on Yu Lao's body, even the sword aura couldn't penetrate his flesh. The firmness of the saint golden body couldn't even be broken through by the calamity sword. In the last time, he even risked his life and used all his strength, but he still could only leave a bloody mark on the opponent's shoulder. Chu Yang was actually very clear that the reason why he achieved such results was not because the calamity sword wasn't sharp enough, but because his own cultivation was too weak. If he could also have the cultivation of a saint, he didn't have to reach the same level as Yu Lao. He didn't even have to have the strength of a saint. As long as he had the strength of a beginner saint, he could kill Yu Lao's body like cutting vegetables. But the reality now was that his cultivation wasn't enough. There was a fundamental difference in his foundation. Chu Yang panted and thought quickly, thinking of a way to break through the enemy. If he couldn't even break through the opponent's defense, how could he win the battle? Under the continuous fierce battle, although the duration was very short, every round of battle was a full output. Although the vitality could be endless, the burden of physical exhaustion was unavoidable. Yu Lao on the other side gently breathed a sigh of relief. Previously, he was continuously suppressed by Chu Yang, and the consumption of his cultivation and spiritual power was also extremely huge. It could be said that it was several times more than Chu Yang's consumption. His nerves were always tense, and he didn't dare to be the slightest bit careless. At this moment, it was finally time for him to take a breath. But what he didn't expect was that when Yu Lao just breathed a sigh of relief, Chu Yang, who should be more tired than him, actually rushed over again. In a flash, the magnificent sword light once again crossed the distance of 400 feet and came in front of Yu Lao. Yu Lao was furious. He was obviously a small ant, but he actually dared to use such a shameless way of fighting against him. It was really intolerable. Yu Lao roared and fought back with all his strength. Chapter 2174. Another round of fierce battle started again. Chu Yang repeatedly used the 30 moves of the Tribulation Sword technique for more than 10 times. He launched an all-encompassing attack on Yu Lingxia. Every time he used the sword technique, he would gain some new insights. Yu Lai also clearly felt that the power of Chu Yang's sword technique was slowly increasing. Although the increase wasn't very obvious, but compared to the sword technique at the beginning, the power of the sword technique now was almost like two different people. Is this bastard using me to practice his sword technique? This unimaginable thought appeared in Yu Jiayi's mind. But the more he thought about it, the angrier he got. Thinking of this, Yu Lai became unusually angry. Thinking of me, the deputy commander of Mo Yun Heaven Army, how can I be a puppet that you can use to practice your sword technique? Yu Lai let out a long roar, and the sword light suddenly flourished. He actually counterattacked with an unprecedented power. At this moment, Chu Yang suddenly somersaulted out and shouted, "Who's there?" Yu Lai was startled. Is there someone else nearby? Why didn't I notice? Instead, it was Chu Yang who noticed. Then, he saw Chu Yang angrily scolding. "Yuqi, I respect you as a senior and a great commander. That's why I agreed to have a fair fight with you. But I didn't expect you to arrange for your subordinates to ambush me. Late Rain, with your actions, can you still be considered a senior expert? Are you still a deputy commander of Mo Yun Heaven Army? Is this how you eat your words and go back on them?" Yu Lai said angrily. "Nonsense! When did I arrange for my subordinates to ambush you here?" Chu Yang's face was full of anger. "You still dare to not admit it? A real man dares to take responsibility for his actions and have a clear conscience. I didn't expect you to be so cowardly. You dare to do it but fear to take responsibility? What you did is done, and you still want to deny it and quibble. Do you think that everyone in the world is stupid and blind?" After saying that, his face was full of disdain. Yu Lai was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. "You're talking nonsense. There's obviously no one here. Where did the ambush come from?" "Ha!" Chu Yang sneered mockingly. "Shameless person, are you still trying to cover up the truth? Do you still want me to take out evidence?" Do you want to prove that you are despicable? Good, good, good. Yuchi was a proud and arrogant person. How could she accept such an insult? He shouted. As long as you can produce evidence, this general will kowtow to you and admit his mistake. As he spoke, he circulated his divine sense and carefully searched the void. Chu Yang took 8 steps forward. Then, he raised his head and shouted. Heavenly King Mo Yun, you bastard who stabbed me in the back. Come out now! You're just a bunch of rats and dogs. You dare to plot against me but don't dare to come out and meet me? Yuchi only sneered at Chu Yang. Chu Yang said furiously. Do you think that I won't be able to find you just because you know how to conceal your divine soul? Yu Jia was startled. Divine soul concealment? Could there really be someone spying on them from the sidelines? Who was it? Those who had the ability to conceal their divine soul were definitely not ordinary people. Could it be that there was really someone who would sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight, intending to reap the benefits of the fishermen? He couldn't help but concentrate a little more, increasing the strength of his divine sense search. Then, he saw Chu Yang angrily take another 50 feet forward. Suddenly, he shouted, Still not coming out? Chu Yang's wrist suddenly shook, and the calamity sword in his hand flew out. Mixed with the unparalleled power of wind and thunder, it shot towards somewhere in the sky. The sword light was bright and straight up to the sky. Yu Qi involuntarily raised his head to look. He wanted to see what was going on. However, at this moment, Chu Yang, who had just thrown the long sword into the air, suddenly flashed in the moment the long sword left his hand. Yu Qi had just raised his head when he felt a sudden darkness in front of him. He knew that something was wrong. But at this moment, it was already too late to do anything. Then, he felt a huge fist violently smashing his nose. This was really unexpected and impossible to guard against. At this moment, Yu Qi's entire mind was searching for that inexplicable ambusher. And Chu Yang had always been displaying his sword skills. Now that his sword had already left his hand, it was clear that he was already extremely angry. His only thought was that ambusher. Therefore, Yu Qi was 10,000% unprepared. This punch landed solidly on Late Rain's nose without any fuss. Yu Qi's face was suddenly smashed with a white light ripple. That was the protection of the sage's golden body. His whole body flew up from the ground. He was sent flying backward by this punch. He only felt a sharp pain on his face. Late Rain knew that he had been tricked, and was furious in his heart. Chu Yang had already caught up to him like a shadow. He punched Late Rain's eyes again, and then he went all out. His 2 fists brought along countless afterimages, and like a torrential downpour, they smashed onto Late Rain's face. Yu Qi's body suddenly left the ground. His spirit had just recovered when he was hit hard. For a moment, he couldn't react in time. He could only passively fly backward. White light flickered on his face, and circles of ripples were smashed out by Chu Yang. Chu Yang carried a huge momentum. Every punch was full of strength. Like a storm, it landed heavily on Yu Qi's face. On the nose. He didn't hit any other places. He only hit the eyes and nose. Yu Qi's body flew out of the mountain like a kite with a broken string. Chu Yang in front of him followed up. His fists were like meteors, and his hands were like torrential rain. While fighting, Chu Yang shouted, Yu Qi, you despicable and insidious villain! Yu Qi, you dared to plot against me! Yu Qi, you dared to sneak attack! Yu Qi, you really lost Mo Yuntian's face! Yu Qi, you son of a bitch! Yu Qi, how can you be so despicable and shameless to this extent? Yu Qi, I really feel cold for you. Yu Qi, you despicable villain! In a fair duel, you actually used tricks to sneak attack me. Yu Qi, I have seen your so-called ability. It turns out that you are such a despicable and filthy villain. Yu Qi only felt that his heart was about to explode. Who is despicable and shameless? Who is the one who sneak attacked me? Who is the one who schemed? Who is it? Who is it? Who is it? Those shady deeds are clearly done by you, Chu Yang. It's you! It's you! You were the one who used the trick to ambush me. After your ambush succeeded, you shamelessly turned the tables and pushed all the blame on me. Now you can still speak so righteously and righteously. What's even more outrageous is that you actually said it so sullenly and indignantly. How can you be so shameless? You are simply despicable and shameless. There is no limit to how low you can be. But these words were all in Yuchi's heart. He didn't have any chance to say it. After his whole body was smashed into the air, his feet never landed on the ground. As long as he landed, he would be able to catch his breath. Even if he had to take a few hits, he would have to get out of this embarrassing situation first. But in this short period of time, Chu Yang actually blasted out 310 punches. There was no gap at all. Chu Yang's punches carried a violent momentum. He didn't seek to injure the enemy, only to charge forward. Even if Yuchi used the 10,000-pound hammer, he still couldn't step on the ground. He could only sullenly fly all the way back. He didn't even dare to open his mouth to forcefully convert his energy. Because, once he opened his mouth, his teeth would definitely be broken. In the current situation, he was completely relying on the strong defense of the saint's golden body to resist Chu Yang's attacks. Once he forcefully opened his mouth, the operation of the saint's golden body would be temporarily interrupted. Although he wouldn't be seriously injured in other places, his teeth would definitely be broken. That was the place where the saint's golden body couldn't fully protect. Yuchi's current situation was in line with an old saying, suffer in silence. Eat in silence. You know what you're doing. He was so sullen that he wanted to go crazy. But he could only endure the beatings all the way. In the original open space, the injuries of both sides had been fully bandaged. Everyone was glaring at each other. If it wasn't for the strict orders of both sides not to fight, they would have already killed each other. If looks could kill, then everyone on both sides would have died at least 1,000 times already. All that was left was worry for the two sides that were fighting right now. On a mountain far away, vast sword energy shot into the sky and danced in the air like gods and demons were fighting. This kind of intense battle was too much for everyone to take in. Even Mo Yuntian and the others who had been full of confidence in Yuchi couldn't help but feel nervous. They couldn't be sure. They were very familiar with martial Yu's fighting style. They could see that the sword light that seemed to want to cut through the world was definitely not martial Yu's sword. Since it wasn't, then it had to be Chu Yang's. If they inferred based on this, then they could come to a shocking, inconceivable, and unbelievable conclusion. Ever since the battle started, Marshal Yu had been passively taking a beating? He had been at a disadvantage the entire time? He was definitely at a disadvantage. When they thought of this, everyone frowned. There was great worry on their faces. That Chu Yang's strength had reached such a terrifying level? Just as they were thinking about this, they saw the sword light in the sky suddenly dissipate. It seemed that the battle over there had stopped. Everyone, regardless of friend or foe, stood up in unison. Everyone's heart was beating rapidly. Who was the winner of this battle? Suddenly, an enormous boom sounded. Then they heard Chu Yang's furious curses. "Yu Qi, you despicable and shameless person!" The voice was clear and powerful, penetrating and shaking the sky. Everyone was shocked. What was it? Why was Chu Jian so angry? Then Chu Yang's curses sounded again. "You dared to ambush me! You dared to ambush me! You dared to use underhanded tactics! You could not win against me, so you used such underhanded tactics! What kind of hero are you? You really make people laugh." Everyone realized. As they had expected, the truth was like this. The second chapter is still missing one, will be completed tomorrow. Chapter 2175. Previously, when he saw that Yuchi had been in a passive defensive state, he already felt that he wasn't Chu Yang's opponent. But he absolutely didn't expect that Yuchi would actually use despicable means in such a fair battle. Such a person was Mo Yuntian's vice commander? For a moment, everyone looked at Mo Yuntian's people with disdain. Yuchi's subordinates instantly blushed and fidgeted uneasily. Most of them lowered their heads. The other party's eyes were filled with disdain, sneers, and mockery. It was really difficult to face them head on. Tan Tan laughed in a strange voice. Ah ha ha! Vice Commander Mo Yutian, TSK, you truly have an awesome status. You can't afford to lose. You've even resorted to crafty plots and tricks. Ha ha, so this is the fair fight that Vice Commander you had proposed. This is Mo Yutian's strength of character. Ha ha ha! I've experienced it. I've fucking widened my horizons today. Instantly, Bai Yu Qin, Che Su Chu, and the others booed. The generals under Meng Wuya were even more pleased. Yu Qi has always been this kind of trash. We have seen this kind of dirty tricks many times, so we are not surprised anymore. That's right. Yu Qi is just a plate of dog meat. He can't get to the main seat. It's really Mo Yuntian's great sorrow that such a person occupies such a high position. Knowing that he can't beat the other, he used such a scheme in a fair battle. TSK, as expected of Vice Commander Yu. Otherwise, how could he not be able to beat Commander Mu? With such a character, TSK, he's dreaming. That's right. On the opposite side, the people under Yu Qi's command all lost face. They felt deeply ashamed. They wanted to refute, but the truth was in front of them. They could not speak without conscience. They could only curse inwardly. How could Vice Commander Yu do such a thing at such a time? Could it be that Chu Yang's strength had really reached a point where he could not compete with him? To force Commander Yu to do such a despicable thing? Then, the doubts in everyone's heart were completely dispelled by the truth in front of them. Before everyone's eyes, banging sounds rang out one after another, shaking the mountains and the earth. What was that sound? Everyone looked towards the source of the sound and saw two figures entangled with each other in the distance. They floated over from the sky at an astonishing speed. It was also mixed with Chu Yang's angry and aggrieved scolding. Everyone focused their eyes, and at that moment, that scene, they couldn't help but be shocked. Only to see Yu Qi fluttering backwards without any strength to fight back, while Chu Yang was madly chasing after him and beating him up. Every punch was as heavy as a mountain on Yu Qi's face. For a moment, everyone was petrified and speechless. What the fuck, this Chu Yang is actually so ferocious. He actually grabbed Yu Qi like he was beating a pig that couldn't fight back, and beat him up in such an unbridled manner? This. Everyone felt that their worldview had been completely overturned at this moment. If Chu Yang was beaten up by Yu Qi like this, perhaps everyone wouldn't be so surprised. But now, the reality was right in front of their eyes. The one who was madly swinging his fists was clearly Chu Yang, and the one who was beaten up without any strength to fight back was indeed Yu Qi. A saint! Bastard! Chu Yang's angry roar seemed to shake the heavens and the earth. It's a fair fight. You can't beat me, so it's fine if you admit defeat. I don't have to take your life, so why do I have to use such a despicable scheme? Everyone understood. It seemed that Deputy Commander Yu had gone too far just now. Why would the other party be so crazy? So shameless and like a hooligan, he attacked with his fists? I already said that I don't want your life. I already said that I can let you go, but you still want to use such despicable means. It's really annoying, Chu Yang scolded. Do you still have any face? You've lived for so many years in vain. Everyone looked at each other. What did Deputy Commander Yu do to anger the heavens and the people? If Yuan Tianjie knew that you would actually do this, I'm afraid that he would be so angry that he would immediately be cuckolded. Chu Yang was filled with righteous indignation. Everyone looked at each other and was stunned. What was this saying? Yu Qi did this. What did it have to do with Heavenly Emperor Mo Yun being cuckolded? You actually sneak attacked me when you were kneeling down and begging for mercy. You simply have no bottom line, no bottom line. Chu Yang seemed to be so angry that he couldn't speak. Only his fists were getting heavier and heavier. You're a fucking piece of trash. You're a fucking piece of trash. Everyone was in an uproar. Yuchi actually knelt down and begged for mercy before? And then sneak attacked him again? This, only to see Yuchi's face splattered white light in all directions. She floated back unsteadily. But Chu Yang still didn't stop. He kept on scolding. You know it yourself. I really don't want to kill you. I really don't want to, you know? Yuchi's body was still flying back like a kite with a broken string. His eyes glared at Chu Yang, and he was so angry that he wanted to die more than 100,000 times. Finally. Puff! Yuchi suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, and the tip of his right foot suddenly stepped on a broken trunk of a big tree. Finally, he took a deep breath without caring about anything else. He raised his head and roared. Chu Yang! Obviously, he was so angry that he couldn't speak clearly. A world-destroying aura suddenly surged out from his body, and it was Deputy Commander Yu who had burned his own life potential, desperately bursting out a defensive counterattack. Bang! Chu Yang's body floated backwards at an extremely fast speed. This round of crazy beating had finally come to an end. In this short period of time, Chu Yang had smashed a total of 1,800 punches on Yuchi's face. After Chu Yang landed on the ground, he staggered a bit, and forcibly swallowed the blood in his throat. He stood steadily on the ground, and looked at Yuchi on the opposite side with his hands behind his back, and said compassionately, Yuchi, although you want to harm me, I don't want to fight to the death with you. It's enough to win or lose. If you hadn't violated my taboo, disregarded the principle of a fair battle, and used those dirty tricks, I wouldn't have taught you such a lesson. But since things have come to this, I hope you can learn from it in the future. As the saying goes, if you know your mistakes and can correct them, nothing is better. As the saying goes, the sea of bitterness is boundless, repent, and the shore is at hand. As the saying goes, repenting is more precious than gold. Although you're a few years old, you still have some time to live. Seize the remaining days and start anew. These words were said with a strong sense of righteousness that inspired reverence and good intentions. If people who didn't know heard it, they would think that this was a savior. Others have used such dirty tricks on you, and you're still trying so hard to educate them. Really a noble character, really a high mountain to look up to. Yuchi had just landed on the ground dizzily. He staggered a bit, and then he found that he was already in front of the crowd. Could it be that in front of his subordinates, he was beaten up so fiercely and without any face? Then he heard Chu Yang's words. So compassionate and sincere. So sincere in his teachings. So true in his feelings. So great in his character, so noble in his character. For a moment, the fury in his heart could no longer be suppressed, and it burst out fiercely. The kind of suffocation that almost made him crazy, and the kind of humiliation that almost made him explode, all rushed into his heart. In an instant, his heart convulsed with anger, and his liver trembled with anger. He pointed a trembling finger at Chu Yang. Just as he opened his mouth to say something, he felt something sweet in his throat. He spat out a mouthful of blood with a wah sound. Then, he spat out a dozen mouthfuls of blood. His face instantly turned as white as paper. For a moment, he almost couldn't stand. Deputy Commander! Commander Yu! What's wrong? Deputy Commander Yu, you have to take care. Your health is more important, nothing else is important. Immediately, someone flew forward to comfort him. Chu Yang stood across from him with his hands behind his back. He looked really elegant, extraordinary, and otherworldly. In reality, the two hands were constantly circulating and rubbing against each other. He sucked in a breath of cold air. Motherfucker, why are this old bastard's bones so hard? After this round of 1,800 punches, even the bones in my hands have cracked. It's so painful that I can't take it anymore. This old bastard hasn't been beaten to death, and he isn't even injured. And that damned protective divine technique actually lasted for 1,700 punches before it was broken. Such a person is only at the level of a saint. Then what about a high-level saint? Motherfucker. My hands are really in so much pain. At this point, Yuchi finally took a breath, but he still spat out a dozen mouthfuls of blood. Firstly, it was because of the injury, and secondly, it was because of anger. Of course, the main reason was still anger. This result was reasonable. Even if Chu Yang had used the heavenly divine technique to its fullest extent, it would still be impossible for him to beat Yu Sha to death with his saint-level cultivation. Even if Chu Yang had used the heavenly divine technique to its fullest extent, and continuously hammered Yu Sha with the strongest force, it would still be impossible for him to beat Yu Sha to death. Chu Yang made a series of sneaky moves and created an opportunity. Finally, he gained the great advantage of 1,800 punches in a row. He finally shattered Yu Qi's protective holy aura. But the protective holy aura of a saint was too strong. Only the last 100 punches really hit Yu Qi's body. However, with such a high-intensity output, Yu Qi's protective divine aura was finally broken, but Chu Yang didn't have it easy either. Chapter 2176. However, Chu Yang was determined to fight with all his might. If I don't kill him, I'll be dead for sure. I must persevere. It was precisely because of this mentality that Chu Yang continued to throw punches without any regard for his life. He continued to punch until the bones of his two fists were completely broken. If he didn't stop and forced himself to fight, Yu Qi would at most be more seriously injured, but his life would definitely not be in danger. But Chu Yang's two hands might be completely crippled. In addition, Yu Qi was a saint-level expert after all. Although he was in a difficult situation at the moment, who knew if such an expert had any hidden secret methods? If he really didn't care and really damaged his own foundation to fight back, with Chu Yang's current state, as long as Yu Qi used all his strength to fight back, even if Chu Yang didn't die, he would be seriously injured. In view of this, especially in the current situation where the tribulation space was still closed and there were no heavy pills left, Chu Yang knew that he had run out of ammunition and food. How would he dare to really cripple his hands, let alone seriously injure his body? So when he saw that he couldn't kill Yu Qi even if he used more strength, and might even suffer a counterattack, Chu Yang immediately stopped. If he didn't stop now, his two hands might really be gone. Everyone around looked at him with admiration. No one thought that Chu Yang could be so fierce that he could beat the deputy commander of Mo Yuntian into such a sorry state. It was really too ferocious, too ferocious. Mo Yuntian and the others gathered around Yu Qi and called out repeatedly. They were really worried. Yu Qi still stood straight in the same place. His face was covered with a thick layer of white fog. After a long time, he suddenly roared, "Get out of my way!" An abnormally powerful force suddenly erupted, causing the surrounding people to tumble backwards. The white fog above his head suddenly dissipated, revealing his face. His face was bruised, his nose was crooked to one side, even his lips were blue, and his face was full of blood. His two big panda eyes were so swollen that they narrowed into slits. He stood up straight, and suddenly let out a loud roar. His face suddenly surged with a white light. The dense white light slowly lingered on his face, and the bruises on his face quickly disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. His original thin complexion was restored. The dark shadows at the corners of his eyes and his crooked nose miraculously recovered. When the dense white light completely dissipated, Yu Qi's complexion had completely returned to normal. His eyes seemed to be on fire as he stared at Chu Yang. His eyes were filled with madness as he took a step forward. He gritted his teeth and said, "Chu Yang, what a good Chu Yang! I finally get to know you today." Chu Yang smiled lightly and said, "Deputy Commander you're flattering me. Although you're not my opponent, with your cultivation, you can be considered a top figure in this heavenly imperial court. The world is so big, where can't you go? I believe that as long as you repent and turn over a new leaf, you'll have a bright future ahead of you." He clasped his hands behind his back and looked at Yu Lai expectantly, speaking with the demeanor of an elder. "Young man, do your best. I'm very optimistic about you." Yu Qi stared at him as if he was going to vomit blood. He said angrily, "Chu Yang, you despicable man, Can you be more shameless, more despicable? Chu Yang frowned and said very unhappily, I don't like to hear you distorting black and white. Who's despicable? Who's shameless? Who's despicable? Why don't you let everyone be the judge? Justice is in people's hearts. How can right and wrong be argued? Yuchi roared like a mountain. Good thief, are you saying that I'm despicable, shameless, and despicable? Chu Yang smiled faintly again and said very generously, Look at you, why are you so anxious? How can you be so arrogant? You see, after the battle, you've been suppressed by me. You didn't counterattack at all. This is an indisputable fact, right? Yuchi said angrily. So what? Go on. Chu Yang chuckled and said, Then I suddenly threw the sword into the sky. That's what happened, right? I'm not lying, right? Yuchi said angrily. It's indeed not bad, but… Chu Yang interrupted and said, I saw that I've been suppressing you with the sword for so long, and you didn't have the slightest strength to fight back. I didn't want to use the sword again. First, I was afraid that I would use too much force and hurt your life. Second, we agreed that it was a fair battle. I had to give you some leeway to fight back. Anyway, I can take care of you with my fists. The result was roughly what I expected. I just didn't expect that you still didn't have the strength to fight back even after I threw away the sword. Yuchi's face turned red. Bastard, you're just… Chu Yang interrupted. Yuchi, what people do, the heavens are watching. Do you dare to swear to the heavens that I didn't throw the sword into the sky and used my fists? The heavens and the earth are witnessing this battle. What are you still arguing about? Yuchi was so angry that he couldn't speak. You… Chu Yang said with a puzzled face. Oh right, I've always been puzzled about something. Why did you look up when I threw the sword into the sky? It's just a sword. What were you looking at? Yuchi's anger surged like a mountain. The more anxious he was, the more he couldn't say any words to defend himself. Young man, it's true that you have to keep your eyes and ears open during a battle, but you can't ignore the enemy in front of you. Chu Yang said earnestly. What is the enemy? The enemy is a sworn enemy who can seize any flaw in you and deal a fatal blow to you. Young man, this is a bloody lesson. Remember it well. Yuchi had a problem since he was young, which was that he stuttered a little. Usually it was better, but once he was anxious and angry, the more he wanted to say, the more he couldn't say anything. At this moment, he was obviously angry to the extreme. But under Chu Yang's sharp tongue, one sentence after another, Yuchi couldn't answer directly. He was so anxious that his mouth was full of saliva, but he couldn't refute. At first glance, it seemed that he was speechless because of Chu Yang's words. There was really no difference. When you looked up, I took advantage of the moment when you exposed your flaw and punched you in the face. A duel is about not giving in on the spot and not showing mercy. You also said this sentence. I didn't do anything wrong in this matter, right? We are originally enemies. Killing on the battlefield isn't scrupulous, right? Not to mention that I hit you. Even if I cut you with my sword, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Chu Yang's words seemed reasonable and righteous. And every sentence occupied the place of righteousness. Every sentence was afraid that the other party wouldn't agree, and he had to ask, right? Everyone listened and nodded. Even the people on Yuchi's side were no exception. In fact, this matter really sounded like Yuchi was too stupid. Tan Tan held his stomach and laughed. Ah ha ha ha. I'm dying of laughter. Motherfucker, there's actually such a good thing in the world. He laughed until he wiped his tears and said, Motherfucker, both sides were fighting. He just casually threw a sword, and you actually looked up while fighting. What are you looking at? Haven't you seen a sword before? You're so fucking stupid. I broadened my horizons again today. Moreover, because you looked up and got beaten up like this, you can still feel so wronged and vomit so much blood. With your fucking IQ, you can actually become the deputy commander of Mo Yuntian? I'm really fucking stupid. If it was me, with my extreme intelligence, wouldn't I become the emperor of that Mo Yuntian? Motherfucking Yuan Tianji would have to call me father? Tan Tan's words immediately gained the approval of the Dream Slayer army and by Yi Qin. They nodded and echoed. Who is the despicable, shameless, and despicable one? Chu Yang looked up and was proud. Yu Qi. Everyone said in unison. Who is the stupid one? Yu Qi. Who's the one who's stupid? Yu Qi. Who is the stupid one? Yu Qi, Yu Qi, Yu Qi, it's Yu Qi. There's no one else. Everyone shouted, and their laughter shook the sky. On the opposite side, Yu Qi's subordinates were all pale. Motherfucker, Deputy Commander, you did this himself. Motherfucker, we can't even find a reason to refute. Yu Qi used his life potential to recover from his injuries while cursing. On the other side, Chu Yang's hands were also trembling. He couldn't hold his sword at all, and could only talk to delay time. Although the two of them had the same idea, Chu Yang's words were too infuriating. Others might think that he was righteous, but Yu Qi was so angry that he almost went mad. Listening to him distorting the facts so much, but her own mouth was not good enough. She couldn't win the argument. Late Rain was so angry that her internal organs were smoking. She simply didn't care about the injury. More and more white foam appeared at the corner of Yu Qi's mouth. He was stunned and couldn't speak. He roared and pounced forward fiercely, shouting, "Let everyone see who's the one who's not the other's opponent!" Since he couldn't explain it clearly, he would explain it with facts. Chu Yang laughed heartily. "The outcome has been decided, and you still want to fight? You should know that I was merciful last time. I didn't use my sword against you, but my fist. If I used my sword, would you still be alive? You're so despicable and shameless. I didn't kill you, but you still want to court death? Come, 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 I'll fulfill your wish." Everyone felt that this was reasonable. The other party didn't use his sword, and you were already swollen. Now that you want to use your sword, isn't that courting death? They all came forward and pulled Yu Qi. "Marshal Yu, since the outcome has been decided, let him live." These words were very appropriate, and greatly took care of Yu Qi's face. But Yu Qi almost vomited blood and said, "Why should I let him live? I must kill him." Everyone despised him in their hearts. "You're already swollen, and you still won't let him go." Chu Yang is right, you're really too shameless. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.